Welcome to this serene journey through the life of Penthesilea, the legendary queen of the Amazons. Her story is one of courage, destiny, and sacrifice, set against the backdrop of the ancient world and the fabled Trojan War. Tonight, we will trace her path, from her birth in the land of the Amazons to her tragic and heroic end on the battlefield. As we gently unfold the chapters of her myth, let the peaceful rhythm of this ancient tale carry you through the quiet echoes of time. Penthesilea's courage, her resolve, and her strength in the face of destiny will guide us through each moment, each turn of fate, allowing you to sink into the stillness of the night. Feel the calm of this narrative embrace you as we explore the story of a warrior queen, a hero whose name was carved into legend. May her tale offer you rest and peaceful sleep as her myth drifts softly into your mind. Please take a moment to relax, and as you listen, allow the calm flow of this ancient myth to guide you into a deep and restful slumber. If you enjoy this journey, please like, subscribe, and share where you are watching from. Now, let us begin the story of Penthesilea. In the remote lands of the East, beyond the reaches of civilization and war, Penthesilea was born into a world where legends were forged in the hearts of the strong. Daughter of Ares, the god of war, and an unnamed Amazonian queen, she was destined for greatness from the very moment of her birth. The Amazons, fierce women who lived in isolation, nurtured her with the values of strength and courage. From a young age, it was clear that Penthesilea was no ordinary child. Her beauty, though noted, was overshadowed by the fire in her heart, the will to lead, and the determination to never submit to weakness. Her home, the land of the Amazons, was a place where the sword was as sacred as the word, and where battles were not fought for glory, but for survival. The legacy of her people, one of fearless warriors, lay upon her shoulders like a mantle, and she bore it with pride. As a child, Penthesilea was both fierce and compassionate. She learned the ways of the warrior under the tutelage of seasoned fighters, but also learned the wisdom of her people, how to lead with justice, and how to fight not for conquest, but for the protection of her people and their ways. Her father, Ares, the god of war, did not offer her the guidance of a loving parent. Instead, he bestowed upon her the ruthless gift of combat, a legacy that would shape the course of her life. She was trained in the arts of battle with an intensity that would shape her into the fierce leader of her people. But even as she was molded by war, there remained within her a sense of deep loyalty to her Amazonian sisters, who would later follow her into battle. Her origins, wrapped in the power of Ares and the indomitable spirit of the Amazons, marked Penthesilea as a queen destined for the chaos of war and the annals of myth. Penthesilea's childhood unfolded in the heart of the Amazonian realm, where the winds whispered through tall trees and the earth seemed to hum with the vibrancy of life and death. It was a land shaped by warriors, where women were not only warriors, but also leaders, philosophers, and rulers. From an early age, Penthesilea's life was steeped in the harsh realities of survival and the unyielding pursuit of strength. The Amazonian people, fierce and independent, did not know the soft comforts of other nations. They knew only the sharp edge of their spears, the strength of their horses, and the wisdom of their elders. From the moment she was old enough to grasp a weapon, Penthesilea was taught the ways of battle. Her instructors were not gentle or lenient. They were seasoned warriors, each one having shed blood in countless conflicts. In their eyes, there was no room for weakness, no place for mercy. Her lessons began with the fundamentals, the art of the spear, the shield, and the bow. As her strength grew, so too did the complexity of her training. Penthesilea was taught the ways of mounted combat, the intricate dance of a horse and rider in battle. She became skilled in hand-to-hand combat, learning how to use her agility and strength to her advantage. Every move was measured, every strike was practiced until it became instinct. Yet, for all the emphasis on strength and combat, the Amazons also instilled in Penthesilea the value of strategy. The warriors of her people knew that brute strength alone could not win wars. It was the mind, the ability to think several steps ahead, that truly determined victory. She learned the art of war in its entirety, the planning, the patience, and the devastating consequences of failure. Penthesilea's training was not limited to the battlefield. The Amazons taught her leadership, for they understood that a warrior who could not lead was no warrior at all. She was taught to command with authority and fairness, to inspire loyalty and courage in others. Her strength, both physical and mental, was a reflection of the values of her people. As she grew older, Penthesilea's beauty became as well known as her skill with a spear. Yet, unlike many, she did not use her beauty to gain favor or attention. Instead, her beauty was a reflection of the inner strength and power she possessed. Her face, often set in determination, was an image of the warrior queen she was destined to become. Her piercing eyes were filled with wisdom and resolve, a window into the soul of a future leader, not someone who would be swayed by the whims of others. But it was not the admiration of others that drove Penthesilea. She was driven by the ideals of the Amazons, a people who valued strength above all else. Her every waking moment was devoted to perfecting herself as a warrior. She trained tirelessly, pushing herself to her physical and mental limits. There were days when she could barely stand, yet she would rise again, her resolve unwavering. She knew that the price of leadership was the ability to endure, to never falter. Her determination did not go unnoticed. The Amazonian elders, those who had seen countless warriors rise and fall, began to take special notice of Penthesilea. Her prowess in combat, her natural leadership, and her deep understanding of the ways of war set her apart from her peers. It was clear to them that Penthesilea was destined for something greater. She was not just a warrior. She was a leader, a queen in the making. But even as she excelled in her training, there was a deep, unspoken sadness within Penthesilea. Her heart, though strong and unyielding, carried the weight of something that no amount of training could alleviate. The loss of her sister, Hippolyta, hung over her like a shadow, a reminder that even the strongest among the Amazons were not immune to loss. Her sister's death, a tragedy that had deeply affected her, fueled a fire within Penthesilea, a fire to prove herself not only as a warrior, but as the rightful heir to the throne of the Amazons. The memory of Hippolyta was never far from Penthesilea's mind. She often found herself remembering her sister's laughter, the way she had always been a guiding light for their people. The weight of her loss, combined with the intense pressure to succeed, created an emotional battle that would shape Penthesilea in ways even she could not foresee. Yet, despite this sadness, Penthesilea did not falter. She threw herself into her training with renewed determination, channeling the grief into her pursuit of greatness. It was as though she knew that the only way to honor her sister's memory was through strength, the strength to lead, to protect, and to fight for the survival of her people. By the time Penthesilea reached adulthood, she was a seasoned warrior, a leader of unparalleled skill. She had surpassed her mentors, mastering not only the weapons of war, but also the subtleties of strategy and leadership. Her people saw her as more than just a warrior. They saw her as their future queen, a leader who would guide them through the darkness of war and into an uncertain future. Penthesilea's training had shaped her into a woman capable of facing anything. She was not only a symbol of strength, she was a living embodiment of the Amazonian ideal, a warrior who would never yield, never retreat, and never surrender. The day would soon come when Penthesilea would be called upon to prove herself, to take her place among the great warriors of the world. And when that day arrived, she would face it with the same unwavering resolve that had defined her from the moment of her birth. The winds of fate often change in the most unexpected ways, and for Penthesilea, the course of her life was irrevocably altered by the tragic loss of her beloved sister, Hippolyta. While the Amazons were a people defined by their strength, their fortitude, and their ability to face death without hesitation, even they could not escape the heavy grip of grief. Hippolyta, Penthesilea's sister, was more than just family. She was a symbol of everything the Amazons held dear. Strong, wise, and fiercely independent, Hippolyta was a leader in her own right. She was not just a warrior. She was a beacon of hope for the Amazonian people, someone who held the future of their society in her hands. But her sudden death, under mysterious circumstances, cast a dark shadow over the Amazons, and, in particular, over Penthesilea. It was said that Hippolyta had died in battle, struck down by a powerful enemy. Yet, the specifics of her death were clouded in secrecy. Some whispered that the gods had played a cruel hand, while others believed that it was a betrayal from within their own ranks. No matter the cause, the pain that Penthesilea felt was immeasurable. She had lost not just her sister, but her closest confidant, and the person who had always stood beside her in the face of every challenge. In the wake of Hippolyta's death, Penthesilea's grief was profound. It was a sorrow that ran deeper than the warrior's instinct to fight. It was a sorrow that pierced her very soul. For the first time in her life, she found herself questioning her purpose. Her strength, which had always been a source of pride, now felt like an empty shell. She could no longer take comfort in the certainty of battle. The one person she had relied upon for support, for guidance, was gone. The loss shook her to her core. The days that followed were marked by an intense sense of isolation. Penthesilea withdrew from her people, retreating into solitude to mourn her sister. She would often be seen standing alone in the fields, her face etched with sorrow as she gazed out into the distance, searching for answers. In her quiet moments, she would replay the memories of her sister, remembering the laughter they had shared, the battles they had fought together, and the dreams they had woven for the future of their people. But grief, while all-consuming, did not have the power to break Penthesilea. It only hardened her, refining her spirit like steel in the forge. She knew that to succumb to her sorrow would be a betrayal to Hippolyta's memory and the ideals of the Amazons. She could not allow herself to become consumed by grief. She would honor her sister by continuing the fight that they had both dedicated their lives to. In the months that followed, Penthesilea threw herself into her duties with renewed vigor. She took on the mantle of leadership, not out of a desire for power, but out of necessity. The Amazons needed guidance, and she was the one who had to provide it. With her strength and her mind, Penthesilea began to unite the Amazonian warriors, rallying them to her cause. She became more than just a leader. She became a symbol of resilience, a living testament to the power of overcoming loss. Her leadership was not without challenges. The Amazons, still reeling from the loss of their beloved queen, were reluctant to follow any leader who could not fill the void left by Hippolyta. Penthesilea's rise to power was marked by skepticism, not only from her people, but from herself. She questioned her own worthiness to lead, her ability to fill the shoes of a woman as formidable as Hippolyta. But with each passing day, Penthesilea grew stronger. Her confidence in herself, her ability to lead, and her understanding of the responsibilities that came with her role grew in tandem. The weight of her grief, while never fully disappearing, was tempered by her newfound purpose. She realized that in order to honor Hippolyta's legacy, she must continue their shared dream, a dream of an Amazonian society that would never bow to the whims of others, that would always stand tall in the face of adversity. As Penthesilea's resolve solidified, so did her understanding of the Amazonian way. The Amazons were not just warriors. They were a people bound by duty, loyalty, and strength. It was not enough for Penthesilea to be a skilled fighter. She had to embody the very spirit of the Amazons, fierce, unwavering, and dedicated to protecting her people. She would lead them not just in battle, but in spirit, ensuring that the ideals they cherished would live on even after the loss of their beloved queen. Penthesilea's mourning, though long and painful, led to an awakening within her. It was a transformation that set her on a path towards something greater than she had ever imagined. She became the warrior queen that the Amazons needed, a symbol of both strength and compassion, a leader who could inspire her people to fight, to live, and to honor the memory of those they had lost. Her sister's death, while devastating, marked the beginning of Penthesilea's rise to greatness. It was a turning point in her life, a moment when she was forged into the leader she was destined to be. The grief that had once consumed her was now the foundation upon which she built her strength. And it was through this strength that she would face the challenges of her future, challenges that would test her leadership, her resolve, and her very soul. As the days passed, Penthesilea's grief began to transform into something more profound, a sense of duty, a sense of purpose. She had lost her sister, but she had gained something even more valuable, the understanding of what it truly meant to lead, to sacrifice, and to honor the legacy of those who came before her. In the wake of her sister's death, Penthesilea's path forward became clear. She was destined to lead. The Amazons, though devastated by the loss of Hippolyta, needed a queen who could guide them through the uncertainty and tumult of the world beyond their borders. There was no question that Penthesilea was the right person for the task. The grief she had endured had tempered her spirit, honing her resolve, and preparing her for the immense responsibility that came with leadership. But leadership, as Penthesilea would soon discover, was not only about the ability to wield a sword or command an army. It was about vision, about inspiring loyalty, and about carrying the hopes and burdens of an entire people. The Amazons, fierce as they were, needed not just a warrior, but a queen who could unite them, guide them, and ensure that their legacy continued. Her ascension to the throne was met with a mixture of reverence and uncertainty. While many saw her as the natural successor to Hippolyta, others were hesitant. Some believed that Penthesilea, though a warrior of great renown, lacked the experience to lead the Amazons in such perilous times. The loss of Hippolyta had left a void, and while Penthesilea's strength was unquestionable, it was her ability to unite the fractured Amazons and restore order that would truly define her reign. Penthesilea faced her first challenge not on the battlefield, but within the hearts and minds of her people. She had to earn their trust, not just as a warrior, but as a ruler. The Amazonian people, though loyal to their cause, were fiercely independent. The notion of a single leader, especially one so young, was difficult for many to accept. The Amazons had always fought together as equals, and now they were asked to place their faith in one person, one queen. Penthesilea, aware of this, approached her leadership with humility. She did not seek to force her rule upon the Amazons. Instead, she sought to lead by example, proving her worth through action rather than words. She began by addressing the concerns of her people, listening to their fears and their hopes. She knew that in order to lead them effectively, she had to understand them, not just as warriors, but as women with their own dreams, struggles, and desires. In the days that followed, Penthesilea held councils with the elders of the Amazons, seeking their wisdom and advice. Though she was young, she displayed a maturity beyond her years. She was not the hot-headed warrior eager to take up arms at every opportunity. Instead, she was a queen who understood the value of patience, diplomacy, and careful planning. She listened, and through that listening, she began to gain the respect of those who had once doubted her. Her leadership was tested in numerous ways. The Amazonian people, though skilled in battle, were facing increasing threats from neighboring kingdoms, and rumors of war from distant lands began to reach their ears. Penthesilea understood that the Amazons could not afford to remain isolated. They would have to engage with the outside world, navigate complex alliances, and, when necessary, defend their way of life. The weight of these decisions lay heavily on her shoulders. Yet, for all the complexities of leadership, Penthesilea remained unwavering in her commitment to the ideals of the Amazons. She did not seek glory or fame for herself. Her only concern was the survival and prosperity of her people. To that end, she made decisions with the long-term welfare of the Amazons in mind, even when those decisions were difficult or unpopular. As her rule progressed, Penthesilea's leadership became synonymous with strength, not just in battle, but in wisdom. She led her people through countless skirmishes, guided them through periods of uncertainty, and ensured that their way of life was protected. She was a queen in every sense of the word, a leader who combined the fierce warrior spirit of the Amazons with the measured, thoughtful judgment of a true ruler. Her reign also marked a period of growth and expansion for the Amazons. Under Penthesilea's guidance, they strengthened their alliances with other powerful tribes and forged new relationships with neighboring peoples. Penthesilea was no longer seen as a mere warrior queen. She had become a diplomatic force to be reckoned with, a ruler who understood that the future of the Amazons lay not just in the strength of their swords, but in the strength of their alliances. Though Penthesilea's leadership was initially met with skepticism, over time it became clear that she was more than capable of guiding the Amazons through the most trying of times. She inspired loyalty in those around her, not through fear, but through respect and admiration. She led with a quiet strength, one that did not demand attention, but commanded it nonetheless. Her people knew that under her rule they would endure, they would thrive, and they would never again be vulnerable to the whims of the outside world. But despite her many successes, Penthesilea was not immune to the burdens of leadership. She knew that her role as queen required sacrifices, not just of her own desires, but of her very soul. To lead the Amazons was to bear the weight of their future on her shoulders, a weight that was at once a privilege and a burden. And as the years passed, Penthesilea found herself questioning the cost of her ambition. Was it worth the sacrifices she had made, the relationships she had strained, the parts of herself she had lost in the pursuit of power? The doubts that crept into her mind were never spoken aloud, but they were there, lurking in the corners of her thoughts. For all her strength, for all her determination, Penthesilea was still human. She had inherited the ideals of her people, the expectations of a queen, and the weight of history itself. And yet, in the quiet moments of solitude, when the noise of leadership fell away, she sometimes wondered if she was truly the ruler the Amazons needed. But as she had done so many times before, Penthesilea silenced those doubts. She was the queen of the Amazons. She had been forged by the fires of grief and hardened by the trials of leadership. She would continue to lead, not for herself, but for the people who had placed their trust in her. And in doing so, she would prove that the legacy of the Amazons, a people defined by strength and resilience, would endure, no matter the cost. As the years passed, the world around Penthesilea and the Amazons began to change. The winds of war swept through the known world, and the echo of conflict grew louder. The Trojan War, one of the greatest and most fateful battles in ancient history, loomed on the horizon. It was a conflict that would shape the destiny of countless heroes and kingdoms. For the Amazons, it was a call to arms that could not be ignored. The war between the Greeks and the Trojans was one that had begun for reasons of honor and vengeance, but over time it had grown into a struggle for survival, for dominance, and for glory. The gods themselves took sides in this conflict, with some supporting the Greeks and others backing the Trojans. It was a war that would test the strength, courage, and resolve of every warrior who participated. Penthesilea, now firmly established as the queen of the Amazons, was no stranger to the realities of battle. Her people had long fought for their survival, defending their land against invaders and intruders. Yet, the Trojan War represented something different. It was a conflict on a scale that the Amazons had never before faced. The armies of both the Greeks and the Trojans were vast and powerful, and the stakes could not have been higher. It was in this moment of great uncertainty that the call to arms reached Penthesilea. The Trojan War was not a conflict she could ignore, and she knew that her people could not remain on the sidelines. As a queen, it was her duty to lead her warriors into battle, to ensure that the Amazons did not fall into obscurity or irrelevance. To not participate in the war would be to risk the survival of her people. The decision to join the war was not one that Penthesilea made lightly. She knew that the Amazons were not merely warriors. They were a proud people, bound by their own code of honor and independence. To fight in the Trojan War meant risking everything: their lives, their way of life, and their very identity. But to refuse the call would mean abandoning the ideals that had always defined the Amazons. Penthesilea understood that her people's strength lay in their ability to confront challenges head-on, no matter how great or daunting those challenges might be. In her chambers, alone with her thoughts, Penthesilea pondered the consequences of her decision. She knew that this war would test her in ways she could not predict. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with danger and bloodshed. But she was no stranger to such struggles. Her own life had been shaped by loss, sacrifice, and the unrelenting need to fight for survival. The Trojan War, with all its complexities, was simply another battle in the long line of challenges that she and her people had faced. And so, Penthesilea made her decision. She would lead the Amazons into the fray. She would take her place among the great warriors of the age, standing alongside the heroes of Greece and Troy, and she would fight not only for her people, but for the future of the Amazons themselves. In the months that followed, Penthesilea prepared her warriors for the journey to Troy. The Amazons, fierce and unyielding, had no need for elaborate speeches or grand promises. They were a people who understood the language of battle, who spoke in the silent code of warriors. Yet, Penthesilea took the time to address her people, not with the fanfare of a conqueror, but with the quiet authority of a leader who understood the weight of her words. "War is not a place for the weak," she said. "We fight not for glory, but for survival. We fight to protect our way of life, our honor, and our people. We stand as one, as we always have, and when this war is over, the Amazons will endure." Her words were met with silence, but in that silence was a deep understanding. The Amazons, though fierce and independent, knew that their queen spoke the truth. This war would be unlike any they had faced before, but they would face it together, united in purpose and resolve. The journey to Troy was long, and the Amazons marched with purpose. As they travelled, Penthesilea found herself reflecting on the enormity of the task ahead. The Greeks, led by some of the greatest heroes of the age, would be formidable opponents. Achilles, Hector, Agamemnon, all of these men were known for their strength and prowess in battle. But Penthesilea was undeterred. She had faced challenges far greater than this, and she would face this one with the same unwavering courage that had always defined her. As the Amazonian forces drew closer to the shores of Troy, Penthesilea's thoughts turned to the warriors she would soon encounter. Achilles, in particular, occupied her thoughts. She had heard tales of the Greek hero, tales of his unmatched skill in combat, his fearlessness, and his relentless drive for victory. The two would inevitably clash, their fates bound by the tide of war. Penthesilea knew that she would have to face him not just as a warrior, but as a queen, a leader who would represent the strength of her people. But for now, there was only the war ahead, the vast battlefield that awaited her. The Amazons had arrived, and they were ready. The sound of their horses' hooves echoed in the distance, a foreboding sign that the time for battle was upon them. Penthesilea, as ever, remained calm. She would lead her warriors with the same determination and strength that had carried her through every trial in her life. The Trojan War would be her greatest challenge yet, but it would also be the moment when the Amazons proved their place in the world. They would not be forgotten. They would fight, and they would endure. The journey to Troy was long, arduous, and filled with uncertainty, but Penthesilea led her warriors with unwavering determination. Each step they took was measured and purposeful, for they knew the significance of their mission. The Amazonian forces were not mere spectators in the grand drama of the Trojan War. They were active participants, destined to leave their mark on the conflict. As they approached the shores of Troy, the anticipation in the air was palpable. The winds whispered of the legendary city, of the walls that had withstood countless sieges, and of the warriors who had laid siege to it for nearly 10 years. The Greeks, with their vast armies, had fought long and hard to breach the walls of Troy, but so far their efforts had been in vain. The Amazons, led by Penthesilea, were now poised to join the fray, their presence a reminder that the war was far from over. When they finally arrived at the camp of the Greeks, the sight was overwhelming. Tents stretched as far as the eye could see, and the sounds of battle, of weapons being sharpened, and soldiers preparing for war filled the air. It was here that Penthesilea would come face to face with some of the greatest heroes of Greek mythology. The first to greet the Amazons was Agamemnon, the leader of the Greek forces. His imposing figure, clad in armor, loomed over Penthesilea as they exchanged words. Agamemnon, though accustomed to the might of great warriors, could not help but be impressed by the sight of the Amazonian queen. Penthesilea's presence was commanding. Her beauty, though striking, was overshadowed by the aura of strength that surrounded her. It was clear that she was no ordinary warrior, but a queen in her own right. "You are welcome here, Queen Penthesilea," Agamemnon said, his voice steady and authoritative. "The Greeks have long awaited the arrival of the Amazons. Your strength will be a welcome addition to our cause." Penthesilea, ever the tactician, offered a courteous nod. "We come to fight, not for glory, but for survival. The war is not yet won, and we are here to ensure that it is not lost." Her words, though measured, carried the weight of her people's history. The Amazons were not simply soldiers. They were a proud and noble people, bound by their own code of honor. They would not fight for mere conquest. They fought for a cause they believed in, the protection of their way of life and the preservation of their legacy. As Penthesilea and her warriors settled into the Greek camp, it did not take long for her to cross paths with the most renowned hero of the Greeks, Achilles. Known for his unmatched prowess in battle, Achilles was a figure who struck both fear and admiration into the hearts of those who fought alongside him. His reputation had preceded him, and Penthesilea had heard tales of his strength, his rage, and his nearly invincible nature. Their first meeting was nothing like the grand encounters of myth. It was a quiet moment, a passing glance as Penthesilea walked through the camp. Her eyes met Achilles, and in that instant she saw the same fire in his gaze that had fueled her own ambition, the drive to be the best, to conquer, to emerge victorious. There was no hesitation in his stare, no fear or uncertainty. In that brief exchange, Penthesilea understood that this war would not be an easy one. Achilles, for his part, was struck by Penthesilea's presence. He had fought countless battles, faced countless enemies, but something about the Amazonian queen stood out. There was a grace in her movements, a quiet strength in the way she carried herself. She was not like the other warriors he had encountered. She was different, powerful yet composed, fierce yet wise. As the days passed, the tension between the Greek and Amazonian forces grew. Both sides were preparing for the inevitable clash with the Trojans, but the presence of the Amazons added a new dynamic to the war. It was clear that the Amazons were not merely auxiliaries. They were formidable warriors in their own right, and their involvement in the conflict would change the course of the battle. Penthesilea, ever the strategist, took the time to observe the Greek forces. She watched Achilles in action, noting his movements, his tactics, and his incredible speed and skill. She had heard the stories of his near invincibility, and it was clear that those stories were not without merit. But Penthesilea was no ordinary warrior. She had faced battles that had tested her resolve, and she had come through them stronger than before. She knew that Achilles, though powerful, was not without his weaknesses. The more Penthesilea observed Achilles, the more she found herself intrigued. She had no interest in the fame or glory that Achilles seemed to crave. For her, the battle was not about personal recognition, but about ensuring the survival of her people. Yet, she could not deny that there was something about Achilles that fascinated her. Perhaps it was his relentless drive, or perhaps it was the way he seemed to embody the very essence of the warrior spirit. Whatever it was, Penthesilea found herself drawn to him, even if only out of a sense of respect for his abilities. But even as she respected him, she knew that the time would come when they would have to face each other in battle. It was inevitable. The war had already pitted them against one another in a battle for supremacy, and both were too proud, too driven, to allow the other to emerge victorious without a fight. As the days wore on, the tension between Penthesilea and Achilles grew. They exchanged glances, brief moments of recognition that spoke volumes without words. Each time their eyes met, there was an unspoken understanding that they were bound by fate, that they would soon clash in a contest of strength and skill that would shape the outcome of the war. For now, however, they were allies, fighting side by side against the common enemy of Troy. The fate of the war, and their own fates, was still to be determined. But one thing was certain. Their paths were now inextricably linked, and the story of their clash was already being written in the annals of history. As the days passed in the Greek camp, Penthesilea's understanding of the war and its many moving parts grew ever deeper. She watched the Greek forces prepare for the next wave of battle, feeling the heavy weight of their hopes and fears pressing down on the air. There was a tension that hung like a storm cloud, just waiting to break, and it was here that she knew she would find herself caught, between the legacy of the Amazons and the towering figure of Achilles, the hero who stood at the forefront of the Greek army. The first true encounter between Penthesilea and Achilles was not the dramatic clash one might expect from two such fierce warriors. It was not a battle that was fought with weapons, but one fought with eyes, a contest of wills, as each looked upon the other for the first time in the midst of a quiet moment before the storm of battle. Penthesilea had always been a woman who observed her surroundings with sharp focus. As the Greek army assembled for a new assault on Troy, she took it upon herself to study the warriors around her, seeking to understand their movements and their strategies. It was during one such observation that her eyes met Achilles from across the field. The moment was fleeting, yet in that single glance there was an exchange that transcended words. In Achilles' eyes, Penthesilea saw not just the fearsome warrior of myth, but a man who had been forged by endless war, a man whose life had been carved from the very bones of battle. His reputation had spread far and wide. His invulnerability, his rage, and his thirst for glory. To many, he was the greatest of all warriors. But in that single glance, Penthesilea saw the burden of that greatness. Achilles, for his part, was not one to be easily impressed. He had fought beside and against countless warriors over the years, and each had come and gone, their names fading into the shadows of history. But there was something different about Penthesilea. Her presence, the calm authority in the way she moved, her steely resolve, these were qualities that resonated with Achilles on a deeper level. He had seen many warriors who were driven by the lust for victory, but there was a quiet strength in Penthesilea that told him she was not driven by vanity or fame. She was driven by something far more profound, the survival of her people and the fierce protection of her legacy. The brief moment of their exchange was followed by a tense silence. Neither spoke. They did not need to. Their eyes had already said everything that needed to be said. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a recognition of each other's power and purpose. Though they had not yet faced each other in battle, it was clear that their fates were already intertwined. The war between the Greeks and the Trojans had become a stage upon which many heroes would play their parts. But for Penthesilea and Achilles, the war would serve as the crucible that would shape their legacies. In that fleeting moment, the groundwork for their eventual clash was laid, and the seeds of their confrontation were sown. As Penthesilea returned to her warriors, she could not shake the feeling that something had shifted within her. It was as if, by locking eyes with Achilles, she had somehow been drawn into his orbit, her destiny bound to his, in ways she could not yet fully comprehend. She knew that the time would soon come when she would stand face to face with him on the battlefield, and when that moment arrived, she would have to be ready. But even in the face of this growing tension, Penthesilea did not allow herself to be consumed by it. She had a war to fight, a people to lead, and a legacy to protect. Achilles, for all his fame, was but one player in a much larger game, and while their paths were now set to cross, she would not allow her focus to waver. For Achilles, too, the first meeting with Penthesilea left a mark. Though he had seen countless warriors over the years, there was something about her that made him pause. She was different from the others, not just a warrior, but a queen, and a queen who seemed to carry the weight of her people's hopes and dreams with grace and determination. He could not help but admire her, even as he knew that their ultimate confrontation was inevitable. But Achilles, like Penthesilea, understood the nature of war. It was not a place for hesitation or uncertainty. There was no room for respect on the battlefield. When the time came for them to face each other, it would be as enemies, as warriors bound by the code of combat. The personal admiration they may have had for one another would have no place in the heat of battle. As the days passed and the preparations for the Battle of Troy continued, Penthesilea's thoughts often returned to that moment. She could not ignore the pull that Achilles had on her, nor could she deny the respect she felt for the man who had earned his place among the greatest heroes of his time. But she also knew that when the time came, their paths would diverge. One of them would emerge victorious, and the other would fall. For now, they were allies, fighting for the same cause. But there was no mistaking the foreboding feeling that hung in the air. The time would come when they would face each other, and when that moment arrived, It would be a battle like no other. It would be a battle of pride, of honor, of legacy, and neither would yield. As the armies of Greece and Troy prepared for the climactic confrontation, the day of battle dawned with a heavy, oppressive silence. The horizon seemed to hold its breath, as if the world itself knew that the tides of fate would shift in this moment. For Penthesilea and her Amazonian warriors, this was the moment they had been preparing for, the moment they would prove their strength on a battlefield that would be immortalized in the annals of history. The Amazonian forces, as they assembled in the Greek camp, were a sight to behold. Clad in their distinctive armor, their faces set with unwavering resolve, they stood as a formidable force, an embodiment of the warrior spirit that defined the Amazons. Penthesilea, standing at their helm, was a figure of quiet authority. Her dark eyes scanned the ranks of her people, her heart steeled for the battle ahead. Her role was not just that of a leader, but a symbol, the unyielding strength of the Amazons made manifest. Unlike the Greek armies, which had been entrenched in the war for years, the Amazons were fresh, their spirits unbroken by the long years of siege and struggle. They had traveled far to reach Troy, and now, as the war reached its boiling point, they were ready to fight for the survival of their people and their place in the world. Today, we do not fight for glory. Penthesilea's voice rang out to her warriors, low but clear. We fight for our future, for our legacy. The Amazons will not be forgotten. We fight not because we must, but because we choose to. The Amazonian warriors stood in silence, their expressions firm, knowing that their queen's words were not just a rallying cry. They were a declaration of purpose. Penthesilea's leadership was not just in her strength or her battle prowess. It was in her ability to inspire, to bind her people together with a shared vision of what they stood to protect. The battle to come would test not just their might, but their very resolve. They would face not only the Trojans, but also the wrath of the gods and the fierce determination of the Greek heroes. The Amazonian charge began with the thunderous sound of hooves, the earth itself seeming to tremble beneath the weight of their advance. The warriors rode side by side, their eyes fixed ahead, their spears gleaming in the dim light of the morning. Penthesilea led them, her presence cutting through the chaos like a blade through fog. She did not hesitate, nor did she falter. Her every movement was calculated, precise, as she guided her people into the heart of the conflict. As they closed in on the gates of Troy, the sound of battle grew louder, the clash of swords, the cries of warriors, the screams of the wounded. The air was thick with the smell of blood and sweat, the metallic tang of war hanging in the atmosphere. The Amazonian charge surged forward, and it was clear that they would not be mere spectators in this battle. They would shape the outcome, for good or ill. Penthesilea's forces clashed with the Trojans with a ferocity that only the Amazons could muster. Their skills in mounted combat and their speed on the battlefield gave them an immediate advantage. They struck like lightning, quick and unrelenting, sweeping through the Trojan ranks with precision. Each Amazon fought with the intensity of one who had been trained from birth to do nothing else but fight. The bond between Penthesilea and her warriors was undeniable. They fought not for themselves, but for the legacy of their people. The Amazons, who had always stood apart from the world, yet now found themselves inextricably tied to the fate of Troy. The Greeks, watching the Amazonian warriors in action, were struck by the power and efficiency of their charge. They were not used to seeing such swift, unrelenting attacks. The Amazons brought a new kind of warfare to the battlefield, one that was as much about strategy and discipline as it was about raw power. And at the center of it all stood Penthesilea, her presence as commanding as any god. The battle raged on, each side pushing forward, each side unwilling to relent. Penthesilea's heart beat in rhythm with the clash of steel, her every decision shaped by the knowledge that her people's survival depended on the outcome of this war. Her role was clear. She would fight not just for victory, but for the preservation of the Amazonian way of life. And she would lead her people with the unwavering strength that had been instilled in her from childhood. It was in the thick of battle, as the Amazons surged forward, that Penthesilea found herself face to face with one of the greatest warriors the world had ever known, Achilles. His figure loomed like a shadow across the battlefield, cutting through the chaos with terrifying efficiency. He was a warrior unlike any other, his every movement seemingly effortless, his strength unmatched. Yet, even as the two locked eyes across the battlefield, Penthesilea did not falter. She knew that this moment would come. It was inevitable. But she also knew that she was no stranger to battle, and she would not back down from a confrontation, no matter the opponent. As the two approached one another, the noise of the battle seemed to fade into the background, the world narrowing to a single point, the inevitable clash between two of the greatest warriors of the age. Their movements were deliberate, calculated, each knowing that the outcome of this moment would define their legacies. Penthesilea's spear met Achilles' shield with a resounding clash, the force of the strike sending a shockwave through both warriors. The earth beneath them seemed to tremble as they faced off, each knowing that their clash would be remembered long after the dust of Troy had settled. The battle raged on around them, but for those few moments it was as if time itself had slowed. Two legends, facing one another in the heart of the greatest war the world had ever known. The battlefield of Troy was an unforgiving place, a canvas upon which the lives of many would be painted in blood and dust. For Penthesilea and her Amazonian warriors, the war was both a test of skill and endurance. Each day brought new challenges, new battles, and new sacrifices. Yet through it all, Penthesilea's leadership never wavered, her resolve only growing stronger with each struggle. The Amazons, fierce and relentless, fought not just with their weapons, but with the indomitable spirit of their people. They were not mere soldiers. They were guardians of a legacy, protectors of their way of life. And it was this sense of purpose that gave them the strength to endure even in the darkest moments of battle. Penthesilea, as always, was at the heart of the conflict, leading her warriors with unmatched precision and courage. She moved through the chaos of war like a force of nature, her spear cutting through the enemy ranks with unrelenting power. Her every strike was calculated, each movement a testament to her training and her strength. She did not fight for glory or recognition. She fought for the survival of her people, for the future of the Amazons. In one particularly brutal skirmish, Penthesilea found herself at the head of a charge against a group of Trojan soldiers who had attempted to breach the Amazonian lines. With her warriors behind her, she led the charge, her horse galloping at full speed as she bore down on the enemy. Her spear struck true, piercing the chest of the first Trojan soldier who dared to stand in her way. But she did not stop. Her gaze remained focused on the enemy, her mind locked on the task at hand. The battle raged around her, but Penthesilea was a woman possessed. She fought with a single-minded determination, her every action purposeful and efficient. She was not simply trying to defeat the enemy, she was trying to protect her people, her legacy. The weight of this responsibility hung heavy on her shoulders, but it did not break her. Instead, it gave her the strength to press on, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Her Amazonian warriors followed her lead, charging into the fray with equal ferocity. Together, they cut through the Trojan forces, pushing them back and reclaiming ground. Penthesilea's presence was a beacon of strength amidst the chaos, a symbol of the Amazonian will to survive. Her leadership inspired her warriors, and in turn, they fought with the same relentless spirit that she embodied. But even as the Amazons pushed forward, Penthesilea knew that the war was taking a toll on her people. The casualties were mounting, and the enemy showed no sign of relenting. The Trojans were fierce, their resolve as unyielding as that of the Greeks. And amidst the tide of war, it was becoming increasingly clear that the outcome of the battle would not be determined by strength alone. Penthesilea's mind was constantly at work, analyzing the battlefield, considering every possible move. She was a strategist as much as a warrior, and she knew that she could not afford to let her people become overwhelmed by the chaos of battle. She issued orders with precision, directing her warriors to key positions, anticipating the movements of the enemy with remarkable accuracy. It was clear that her keen tactical mind was one of the reasons why the Amazons had remained such a formidable force, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. Yet even with her tactical brilliance, Penthesilea could not escape the emotional toll that the war was taking on her. Every fallen warrior, every life lost, weighed heavily on her heart. She had led her people into battle, knowing the risks, knowing the cost. But the price of war was far greater than she had ever anticipated. Each death was a reminder that the Amazonian way of life, the very future of her people, was at stake. And each time she looked upon the battlefield, she saw not just her warriors, but her family, the women she had trained, the women she had fought alongside, the women who now followed her into battle with unwavering loyalty. In one particularly brutal encounter, Penthesilea found herself standing over the body of one of her closest warriors, a woman who had fought by her side for years. The warrior's death was a heavy blow, not just to Penthesilea, but to the entire Amazonian army. She had been a symbol of the strength and unity of their people, and her loss left a hole in the heart of the Amazonian forces. But even in the face of such personal loss, Penthesilea did not falter. She mourned the fallen, but she did not let grief consume her. She knew that the battle was far from over, and that the future of the Amazons depended on her ability to lead, to push forward, to honor the memory of those who had fallen by ensuring the survival of those who remained. As the war dragged on, Penthesilea's reputation among the Greeks grew. She was no longer just the Amazonian queen. She was a force to be reckoned with, a warrior whose skill and determination were unmatched. Even Achilles, the greatest of the Greek heroes, began to take notice of her. There was a growing respect between the two warriors, though it was tempered by the knowledge that their fates were now inextricably linked. The time would come when they would face each other in battle, and neither was willing to back down. For Penthesilea, the war was more than just a battle for survival. It was a test of everything she had ever believed in. Her strength, her leadership, and her dedication to the Amazons were all being tested to their limits. But through it all, she remained unbroken. Her resolve, tempered by years of training and loss, kept her moving forward, one step at a time, through the haze of war. The struggle of war was not just physical, it was mental, emotional, and spiritual. Penthesilea knew that the true battle was not just for victory, but for the survival of her people. And with each passing day, she grew more determined to see that through, no matter the cost. As the war raged on, with the sounds of battle becoming a constant backdrop to the lives of those who fought, Penthesilea found herself at the center of a storm that would soon claim her. The Amazons had fought fiercely alongside the Greeks, their presence on the battlefield proving to be an invaluable asset. Penthesilea's leadership had inspired her warriors to give everything they had, their courage becoming as legendary as the warriors who fought beside them. But as the war entered its final stages, the looming inevitability of a clash between two great forces, Achilles and Penthesilea, could no longer be avoided. The Greeks and the Trojans had fought to a standstill, with neither side able to claim a decisive victory. The city of Troy still stood, the walls as impenetrable as ever, while the Greek army, though vast and powerful, had lost many of its best warriors. And yet, despite the many battles that had been fought, despite the great personal losses on both sides, it was this one moment, this fateful encounter, that would define the war and the legacies of its greatest heroes. Achilles, as the greatest of the Greek warriors, was both feared and revered across the battlefield. His name alone struck terror into the hearts of those who faced him, and it was said that no man could stand against him. His reputation as an invincible warrior had been cemented in the blood of countless battles, and the myth of his near invulnerability only added to his legend. But now, as the final confrontation loomed, even Achilles could not deny the inevitability of the moment that had been set into motion from the first moment he laid eyes on Penthesilea. For Penthesilea, the fight against Achilles was not a battle for personal glory. It was the culmination of everything she had ever fought for. Her people's survival, her duty to the Amazons, and her belief in their strength. All of it came down to this moment. The death of her sister, the rise to power, the battle for Troy. All of it had led her to this confrontation. To face Achilles, the greatest of Greek heroes, was not just a challenge, it was her final duty as queen and warrior. But even as they stood on the precipice of their clash, there was a sense of reluctance in Achilles' heart. He had never before faced an opponent who commanded his respect as Penthesilea did. She was no ordinary warrior. She was a queen, a leader, and a woman who fought not for personal glory, but for the survival of her people. There was something in her eyes, a quiet strength, a dignity, that unsettled him. He had seen countless warriors on the battlefield, but none had inspired the same mixture of admiration and unease that Penthesilea did. Yet, despite the respect he felt for her, the war had become a matter of personal honor for Achilles. He had fought too long, bled too much, to allow anyone to stand in his way. He had fought to protect the Greeks, and he would not let a woman, no matter how fierce, stand between him and victory. The moment of their confrontation was inevitable, and it came at the height of the battle when the Greek forces, exhausted and worn, pushed once more against the Trojan defences. Penthesilea and her warriors fought fiercely, their resolve unbroken, but they were aware of the approaching threat. Achilles had been leading the Greek charge, and now, as the tide of the battle shifted, he made his way toward Penthesilea. As their eyes met across the battlefield, there was no fear in Penthesilea's gaze, only resolve. She was prepared, as she always had been, to fight with everything she had, to protect her people until the very last breath. Achilles, for his part, did not hesitate. The battle had already been won in his mind. This was merely the final act in a long and bloody war. The clash between the two was swift and violent. Penthesilea, with the grace and power of a seasoned warrior, met Achilles in the thick of the fray. Her spear was poised, her movements precise and deadly, but Achilles was no less skilled. His speed and strength were unmatched, and the two warriors engaged in a battle that seemed to echo the clash of titans. The sounds of their weapons striking each other filled the air, each blow carrying the weight of their respective legacies. In the midst of their battle, it became clear that this was a fight neither of them could afford to lose. Penthesilea fought with the fury of a queen defending her people, while Achilles fought with the cold determination of a hero whose name was written into the very fabric of history. Each time they clashed, it was as though the world itself held its breath, waiting to see which of them would emerge victorious. But it was not to be. The tragic inevitability of the battle became apparent when, in a final, fateful exchange, Achilles' spear found its mark. With a swift motion, he drove his weapon into Penthesilea's side, the force of the strike bringing her to her knees. The world seemed to slow as she fell to the earth, the Amazonian queen defeated, her life slipping away. As Penthesilea lay dying, Achilles stood over her, his heart heavy with regret. Though he had struck the blow, it was not the victory he had imagined. There was no glory in it, no satisfaction in bringing down an opponent he had come to respect. He had slain a queen, a warrior, and a woman who had fought with everything she had for the survival of her people. It was a moment that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Penthesilea's final moments were marked not by anger or fear, but by the knowledge that she had fulfilled her duty. She had fought for the Amazons, for her people, and she had done so with the same strength and dignity that had defined her life. As her vision faded, she could hear the sounds of battle continuing around her, but they grew distant, fading into the quiet embrace of death. Her people would remember her not for the way she died, but for the way she lived, a queen, a warrior, and a leader whose legacy would live on forever. The death of Penthesilea was a blow not only to the Amazonian people, but to the very spirit of their warriors. For the Amazons, Penthesilea had been more than just a queen. She had been a symbol of their strength, their unity, and their unwavering resolve. Her death marked the end of an era, the end of a time when the Amazons could look to their queen for guidance, for protection, and for the hope of survival in a world that seemed to grow more hostile with each passing day. As the news of her death spread through the Amazonian ranks, there was a profound silence. The battlefield, which had once been filled with the sounds of clashing swords and the cries of warriors, now seemed hollow. The Amazons, who had fought so fiercely by Penthesilea's side, now stood still, their faces marked by grief, their hearts heavy with the weight of loss. Penthesilea's warriors gathered in the moments following her death, their eyes red with sorrow, their spirits broken by the loss of their queen. They had been trained for battle, for survival, for war, but they had not been prepared for this. They had not been prepared for the loss of the one who had led them, the one who had embodied everything they stood for. Her death, however, was not met with despair alone. For the Amazons, their mourning was also a reflection of their strength. They had lost their queen, but they had not lost their will to survive. They had not lost their resolve to continue the fight, to honor the memory of Penthesilea by carrying on her legacy. The camp became a place of mourning, where the Amazons, united by grief, paid their respects to the queen who had led them with such strength and dignity. They gathered around her body, forming a circle of silence, each warrior offering a moment of reflection. Some knelt in prayer, others stood in solemn respect, their faces etched with the pain of loss. In this quiet moment, they allowed themselves the space to grieve, but even in their sorrow, there was an unspoken understanding that they could not afford to stop. The war was not over, and the fate of the Amazons still hung in the balance. Among the grieving warriors, there was one who stood apart, the Amazonian priestess, who had served as a spiritual guide to Penthesilea and her people. With a quiet reverence, she performed the rites for the fallen queen, ensuring that Penthesilea's soul would find peace in the afterlife. Her words were soft, almost inaudible over the sounds of the wind that whispered through the camp, but the weight of her prayers was felt by all. The ritual was simple, yet profound. The priestess spoke of Penthesilea's greatness, her bravery, and her devotion to the Amazons. She spoke of her courage on the battlefield, of her strength in the face of overwhelming odds, and of the legacy she had left behind. In the priestess' words, Penthesilea was not merely mourned. She was celebrated as a hero, a queen, and a warrior whose spirit would live on in the hearts of the Amazons. As the ceremony came to an end, the Amazons knew that they could not allow their grief to consume them. They had lost their queen, but they had not lost their purpose. Penthesilea's sacrifice had been the ultimate act of leadership, and it was up to her warriors to honor that sacrifice by carrying on the fight. The Amazons gathered their strength, preparing for the battle that lay ahead. The Trojans, though temporarily weakened by the loss of their queen, would not stop fighting. And the Greeks, having witnessed the power and resolve of the Amazons, would not allow them to retreat. There was no time for hesitation, no time for self-pity. The Amazons would honor Penthesilea's memory by standing strong, by fighting until their last breath, by ensuring that the legacy of their people would endure. Penthesilea's death had left a void, but it had also inspired a new sense of unity among the Amazons. They knew that they could not afford to let their grief divide them. They had lost their queen, but they still had each other, and they still had the strength to carry on. They would fight for the future of the Amazons, just as Penthesilea had done. As the battle for Troy continued, the Amazons fought with renewed purpose, driven by the memory of their fallen queen. Each warrior carried Penthesilea's spirit into battle, her strength coursing through their veins as they fought with the same unyielding resolve that had defined her life. And though their queen was gone, her legacy would continue to inspire them, to guide them, and to ensure that the Amazons would never be forgotten. In the aftermath of the battle, as the smoke of war settled and the ground was littered with the bodies of the fallen, the Amazons could take solace in the knowledge that they had honored their queen's sacrifice. Penthesilea's death had not been in vain. It had sparked a new fire in the hearts of her people, one that would carry them forward even in the face of their greatest trials. The death of Penthesilea at the hands of Achilles marked the end of a chapter in the epic saga of the Trojan War. Yet, as with all great warriors, her legacy transcended her death. Though the Amazonian queen had fallen on the battlefield, the imprint of her strength, courage, and leadership would echo through history, inspiring both those who fought beside her and those who came after her. In the days following her death, the Greeks and Trojans alike were forced to confront the undeniable impact of Penthesilea. To the Trojans, she had been a formidable adversary, a fierce queen whose strength had nearly turned the tide of battle in their favor. Her death was a victory, yes, but it was also a somber reminder of the cost of war. And for the Greeks, while they had defeated her on the field, there was a deep respect for the warrior they had lost, one whose honor and bravery were undeniable. Achilles, the man who had dealt the fatal blow, was one of the few who truly understood the gravity of what had transpired. Though he had defeated Penthesilea, he could not shake the feeling that her death had come at a great personal cost. He had faced many warriors in his time, but none had moved him as Penthesilea had. In her, he had seen not only a warrior of great skill, but also a leader who had led her people with a sense of purpose and duty. In his heart, Achilles mourned her loss, even as the world around him celebrated his victory. For the Amazons, Penthesilea's death was a wound that could never fully heal. She had been their queen, their leader, and their inspiration. Her death left them not only without their guiding force, but also with a deep sense of uncertainty about the future. But even in the face of such loss, the Amazons knew that they had a duty to carry on her legacy. The war was not over, and they could not afford to mourn forever. Penthesilea had fought for the survival of the Amazons, and now it was their turn to honor her sacrifice by continuing the fight, by preserving the spirit of what she had stood for. As the years passed, Penthesilea's name became immortalized in the myths and stories of the ancient world. Her death, though tragic, was not seen as a defeat, but as the ultimate expression of sacrifice and honor. Her legend grew, and she became a symbol of the strength and resilience of the Amazonian people. Her courage in the face of death, her unwavering commitment to her people, and her role in the Trojan War ensured that she would be remembered long after the dust of the battlefield had settled. The Amazons, in the years that followed, continued to honor Penthesilea's memory. Her death had forged them into a more united and determined people, one that would not be broken by the loss of a queen. They carried her spirit with them through every battle, through every struggle, ensuring that her name would never fade into obscurity. They passed down her story from generation to generation, a tale of bravery, leadership, and sacrifice that would continue to inspire the Amazons for centuries to come. For the Greeks, too, Penthesilea's legacy endured. Though the war eventually ended with the fall of Troy, the impact of the Amazons and their queen was felt long after the last of the battle's dust had settled. Penthesilea's actions had been a catalyst for change, and the Greeks who had fought alongside or against her would never forget the woman who had stood as an equal to their greatest heroes. Her name became a symbol of strength, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, one could rise above and fight for what was right. In the wider world of myth and legend, Penthesilea's story would live on as one of the great tales of heroism. Her rise from a young Amazonian warrior to the queen who led her people into the heart of the Trojan War became an iconic narrative, an example of the power of women in a world dominated by men. Penthesilea's story was one of defiance against fate, one that showed that strength was not defined by gender or position, but by the will to protect and to fight. In the end, Penthesilea's legacy was not one defined by the manner of her death, but by the way she lived. She had been a leader, a protector, and a warrior whose heart never wavered in the face of danger. And though her life had been short and her death tragic, her influence endured. She became a mythic figure, a beacon for those who sought to follow in her footsteps, and a testament to the enduring power of the Amazonian spirit. In the grand tapestry of the Trojan War, where mortals and immortals alike collided in pursuit of glory, the gods played a pivotal role, their influence woven into the fates of the greatest warriors. Penthesilea, as one of the most formidable warriors of the age, was not exempt from the divine forces that shaped her destiny. The gods watched from their celestial thrones, and their hands guided the course of history in ways that were both subtle and catastrophic. For Penthesilea, the gods' involvement was as much a part of her story as her rise to power or her heroic deeds in battle. From her very birth, she was marked by divine influence. Her father, Ares, the god of war, was both a blessing and a curse. While his presence lent her an extraordinary affinity for combat and the strategy that accompanied it, it also tied her fate to the gods of war, whose whims could be as fickle as the winds of battle itself. Ares, distant as he was, gave her the gift of strength and the unyielding spirit of a warrior. Yet his involvement in her life was minimal, his presence more of a distant shadow than a guiding hand. While Penthesilea's natural abilities were undeniable, they were tempered by the very same divine forces that had shaped so many other warriors, including those she would eventually face on the battlefield, such as Achilles. Though Ares was her father, the gods of the Greek pantheon held no true allegiance to the Amazons. In fact, they often looked upon them with a certain degree of disdain. The Amazons were creatures of war, much like Ares himself, but they were also women, and in the eyes of many gods, that was a paradox. A people who combined the destructive power of men with the nurturing nature of women. It was a balance that did not sit comfortably with the gods, especially those who saw themselves as the true arbiters of power and fate. One of the most significant divine figures that shaped Penthesilea's fate was Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, the moon, and wild animals. Artemis was often considered the protector of women, especially those who defied traditional gender roles and fought to carve their own paths in a world dominated by men. As the leader of the Amazons, Penthesilea had earned Artemis's favor. It was said that the goddess watched over her, guiding her steps in the heat of battle, ensuring that she remained undefeated until her fateful clash with Achilles. Artemis, however, could not save Penthesilea from the forces of fate. While the goddess may have granted her strength and protection, there were forces beyond even Artemis's control. The will of Zeus, the king of the gods, and the unrelenting flow of destiny. In the end, the gods were not always merciful, and they often wove their webs of influence with the cruel indifference that characterizes the divine. But it was not just Artemis who watched over Penthesilea. The war itself, with all its bloodshed and chaos, was a battleground for the gods. Each god had a stake in the outcome, whether it was to ensure the downfall of Troy or the victory of the Greeks. The will of Zeus, the quiet plotting of Athena, the fiery passion of Hera, all of these divine forces played a role in shaping the events that led to Penthesilea's final moments. There is a legend that suggests that before the battle in which Penthesilea would meet Achilles, the gods convened on Mount Olympus to discuss the fate of the Amazonian queen. Some believed that the gods were divided on whether or not Penthesilea would succeed in her quest for honor and glory. There were whispers that the gods of war, such as Ares and Athena, saw Penthesilea as a worthy opponent, one who embodied the very spirit of battle that they championed. But others, including the more vengeful gods like Hera, perhaps saw her as a mere pawn in the larger struggle for control over the mortal world. Perhaps most telling was the involvement of Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, whose role in the war was often understated but significant. It was Aphrodite, in some interpretations of the myth, who saw the fierce beauty of Penthesilea and was struck by it. Some say that the goddess was envious of the Amazonian queen's strength, while others argue that Aphrodite, in her own way, sympathized with Penthesilea's sacrifice. Love, after all, was not just about beauty, but also about sacrifice. Penthesilea's love was for her people and their survival, not for any mortal man or god. In this, she had a kinship with Aphrodite, who understood the sacrifices love demanded. The gods, in their endless games of manipulation, had ensured that Penthesilea's fate would be one of both greatness and tragedy. They had shaped her into the warrior queen she became, but they had also ordained that her death would be as inevitable as her victory on the battlefield. She was not a mere mortal whose fate could be controlled by her actions alone. She was a pawn in the grand cosmic game, one whose power and beauty were fleeting, subject to the whims of those who ruled from above. In the moments before her death, as Achilles stood over her, some say that she saw the faces of the gods. It is said that, in her final moments, Penthesilea felt the weight of their eyes upon her, some watching with respect, others with indifference. But in that moment, she did not fear the gods. She did not fear death. Her life had been a testament to the ideals she held dear, to the strength of her people, and to the power of the warrior spirit. She had lived as a queen, and she would die as a queen. A figure whose legacy would be immortalized in both myth and history. In the end, it was not the gods who decided Penthesilea's fate, but her own heart, her own will. She had fought with honor, with courage, and with the unyielding strength that defined the Amazons. And though the gods may have shaped her destiny, it was Penthesilea who lived her life, a queen, a warrior, and a symbol of the enduring power of those who fight for their people. In the wake of Penthesilea's death, the battlefield that had been filled with the roar of battle grew still, as though the world itself paused to reflect on what had transpired. Achilles, the man who had struck the fatal blow, stood alone amidst the carnage. He had faced countless warriors over the years, but none had affected him as Penthesilea had. Her strength, her nobility, and her unwavering commitment to her people had marked her as a true warrior, worthy of respect. And in some quiet corner of Achilles' heart, she had become a mirror of the very ideals he had lived by. The victory had been his, but it was a hollow one. As the Greek forces surged forward, celebrating the loss of yet another great adversary, Achilles found himself retreating into the solitude of his thoughts. He could not shake the image of Penthesilea's fierce, determined face as they fought, the way her spear had clashed against his, the fire in her eyes that spoke not of fear, but of duty. Even in her final moments, there had been no surrender, no plea for mercy. She had died as she had lived, with dignity, with strength, and with a quiet resolve that marked her as one of the greatest warriors he had ever encountered. It was a victory that should have felt triumphant, but instead it gnawed at Achilles' soul. For the first time in his life, he questioned the very essence of what it meant to be a hero. He had always fought for honor, for glory, and for the recognition that came with being the greatest warrior. But now, standing amidst the aftermath of battle, he felt something he had never truly experienced before: regret. Achilles had known loss before. He had seen countless comrades fall on the battlefield, their names fading into obscurity as the war raged on. He had fought for honor, for the glory of Greece, and for the legacy of his own name. But Penthesilea's death was different. There was no glory in this kill, no sense of triumph. She had been a warrior, a queen, and a leader. She had fought for her people, just as Achilles fought for his. They were not enemies out of choice, but out of circumstance, and that knowledge left a bitter taste in Achilles' mouth. As the Greeks gathered to celebrate, Achilles remained apart, his thoughts consumed by the battle he had just fought, and by the life that had been lost in the process. The Amazons, who had once been an allied force in this war, had now lost their queen, their heart and soul. In their mourning, there was no enemy to defeat, no force to conquer. The war had taken more than just warriors from both sides. It had stolen from the world a leader whose influence would have resonated far beyond the battlefield. Even in the midst of the celebrations, Achilles felt the weight of Penthesilea's death upon him. The image of her dying body, her face still resolute even as the life left her, haunted him. In that fleeting moment, she had become more than just a foe. She had become a symbol, not of what had been lost, but of what could have been. She could have been an ally. She could have been a force for change in a war that had been defined by endless bloodshed. As the hours passed and the noise of the Greek celebration grew distant, Achilles found himself alone on the edge of the camp, staring out into the darkness. The weight of his actions pressed down on him, the regret growing heavier with every passing second. He had killed a woman who had been as worthy an opponent as any he had ever faced. He had killed a queen, a warrior who fought for something greater than herself. And now, in the quiet aftermath, Achilles could not silence the voice in his mind that asked, was it worth it? The gods, as always, seemed indifferent to the struggles of mortals. They had watched the battle unfold, their gaze shifting from one hero to the next, playing their own game with no regard for the lives they had influenced. To the gods, Penthesilea had been little more than a pawn, another piece in a war they had orchestrated. But to Achilles, she had been a reflection of everything he had fought for. A warrior with a cause, a leader with a purpose. As he stood in the silence of the night, Achilles could not escape the growing sense that he had lost something precious. He had fought for so long, for so many years, driven by the desire for glory and recognition. But now, in the quiet aftermath of the war, he realized that glory meant little in the face of the price it demanded. Achilles was a warrior, a man forged by battle and bloodshed. But in the face of Penthesilea's death, he began to question the very foundation of his identity. What had all of his victories brought him? What had all the bloodshed and loss achieved beyond the fleeting recognition of his name? The morning after the battle, as Achilles stood over the fallen queen's body, a deep silence descended upon him. The memory of Penthesilea, her fierce spirit and noble heart, would haunt him for the rest of his life. He had been the one to kill her, but it was her legacy that would endure. In the years that followed, Achilles would continue to fight, but something within him had changed. The glory of battle, once his sole purpose, no longer held the same allure. He had witnessed the cost of heroism, and it was a price he was no longer certain he was willing to pay. The death of Penthesilea had shown him that true greatness was not measured in the number of enemies slain, but in the honor one brought to the battlefield. Achilles would live on as a hero of Greek mythology, his name immortalized in legend. But it was the shadow of Penthesilea's death that would linger with him, a reminder of the fleeting nature of glory and the enduring weight of regret. Though the flames of battle that consumed Troy eventually flickered out, the legacy of the warriors who fought there, particularly Penthesilea, was far from extinguished. Her story would live on, passed down through the ages in the form of art, literature, and myth. Her image, both as a fierce warrior and a tragic queen, would continue to inspire poets, playwrights, and artists for centuries to come. From the very first retellings of her tale, Penthesilea was portrayed as an emblem of the Amazonian spirit, a symbol of fierce independence, strength, and honor. She was not merely a character in the Trojan War, but a figure that transcended the historical context in which she was placed. She represented something greater than any individual battle or conflict: the struggle for identity, the fight for survival, and the cost of sacrifice. In the art of ancient Greece, Penthesilea was often depicted as a striking figure, regal, poised, and powerful. Whether she was shown riding into battle at the head of her warriors, or in a moment of quiet reflection before the conflict began, her image conveyed an inherent strength that resonated with those who viewed it. Artists captured her both as a queen and a warrior, blurring the lines between femininity and power, strength and grace. These portrayals were not just representations of a historical figure. They were idealizations of the very virtues that Penthesilea embodied. Her story, however, was not only depicted in the visual arts. Poets and playwrights too found inspiration in the figure of Penthesilea, using her as a central character in works that explored themes of heroism, grief, and fate. The Greek playwright Euripides, for instance, wove Penthesilea into his tragedies, portraying her as a tragic hero whose death on the battlefield was not the end of her story, but a catalyst for reflection on the nature of war, leadership, and the human spirit. Euripides' portrayal of Penthesilea, although lost to history in the form of his original works, has been reconstructed through the writings of later scholars and playwrights. In these retellings, Penthesilea's fate was not just a casualty of war, but a meditation on the price of honor and the ultimate cost of glory. Her death at the hands of Achilles, though physically devastating, was seen as a moral sacrifice, a warrior queen who laid down her life in the name of her people. The conflict between Penthesilea and Achilles also carried symbolic weight in literature. The two were often depicted as opposites. Achilles, the hero driven by his thirst for glory, and Penthesilea, the warrior driven by duty and the survival of her people. In many versions of their story, their final clash was not just a physical battle, but a confrontation between two different ideals, one rooted in self-serving ambition and the other grounded in sacrifice for the greater good. As centuries passed and the myths surrounding the Trojan War continued to evolve, Penthesilea's image as a tragic heroine became even more pronounced. In later literature, her story was revisited and reimagined by poets and authors, especially during the Romantic period, when the themes of heroism and sacrifice were viewed with greater emotional depth. Writers like Goethe and Byron, who were drawn to the mythological past, saw in Penthesilea a reflection of the warrior archetype, a woman whose strength was both her greatest virtue and her undoing. Her character also became a touchstone in feminist interpretations of mythology. In the 19th and 20th centuries, scholars and writers began to view Penthesilea not just as a tragic figure in a patriarchal story, but as a symbol of female empowerment. She was seen as a woman who carved her own path in a world that did not always allow for women to be warriors or leaders. She was not a passive figure waiting to be saved or defined by male heroes. Rather, she was a proactive force whose decisions shaped the course of history. In these modern readings, Penthesilea's death was reinterpreted not merely as a tragic loss, but as a statement about the limitations placed on women who rose to power in a world dominated by men. Her story became an example of the tension between gender expectations and the capacity of women to embody the same virtues of heroism, bravery, and sacrifice that were so often attributed to male warriors. Penthesilea's image continued to resonate in the visual arts as well, especially during the neoclassical and romantic movements, which often sought to revive ancient myths and celebrate the grandeur of classical heroes. In these works, artists rendered her in a manner that emphasized her strength and dignity, even in the face of her death. The famed painter Peter Paul Rubens, for instance, depicted her as a powerful and regal figure, standing tall in the midst of battle, her beauty and strength equally apparent. In such paintings, Penthesilea was not just a queen. She was an idealized figure, a symbol of the timeless values of heroism and sacrifice. Her tragic death at the hands of Achilles in these works was not an end, but a transformation. The moment of her death was often depicted as serene, her face a calm expression of acceptance as she succumbed to her fate. This representation was, in many ways, an acknowledgement of the noble nature of her sacrifice, that she died not out of weakness, but out of a profound commitment to her people and her cause. Today, Penthesilea continues to captivate modern audiences. In literature, film, and art, her image as a fierce warrior queen who met her end in a tragic yet honorable battle persists. Her story is revisited, reinterpreted, and celebrated as a testament to the strength of women throughout history, both in myth and in reality. Her legacy as a warrior queen lives on in the tales told about her, stories of valor, sacrifice, and leadership that transcend the constraints of time and culture. Penthesilea remains a timeless symbol, not of defeat, but of the courage and strength that can emerge even in the darkest moments. Her death, though tragic, serves as a reminder that true heroism is not measured by the victory in battle, but by the enduring impact one leaves on the world. Penthesilea's myth is not only a tale of personal heroism, but also a powerful symbol of female strength, independence, and leadership. Her life and legacy were deeply intertwined with the cultural ideals of the Amazons, a society of women warriors who defied conventional gender norms in the ancient world. Through Penthesilea's story, we witness the complex intersection of power, gender, and identity, themes that resonate far beyond her time and remain relevant today. As a leader of the Amazons, Penthesilea represents a unique blend of femininity and ferocity. Unlike the traditional female figures in ancient mythology, who were often depicted as passive, supportive, or in need of protection, Penthesilea is a figure who actively shapes her fate. She is not defined by her relationships with male heroes or gods, nor does she conform to the idealized notion of women in ancient Greek society. Instead, she is a self-made warrior, a queen who rises to the occasion when her people need her most, and her power is rooted in her identity as a warrior. Her strength and authority were hard-earned. Trained from a young age in the ways of combat, Penthesilea was not just the figurehead of the Amazons, but an embodiment of their values. She led by example, showing her warriors that leadership was not just about issuing orders, but about standing at the front lines and fighting alongside them. In this way, she represented a model of leadership that was both pragmatic and inspiring, one rooted in action, strength, and unwavering resolve. The symbolism of Penthesilea's character is also intertwined with the concept of sacrifice. While the Greek heroes of the Trojan War are often celebrated for their victory, Penthesilea's death stands as a reminder that true heroism is not about surviving the battle, but about the choices made and the cost of those choices. Her willingness to lay down her life for her people, to fight to the death in defense of the Amazonian way of life, is a powerful act of self-sacrifice. In this sense, her story underscores a key aspect of warrior culture, that the greatest act of strength is often the willingness to face one's mortality with dignity. Penthesilea's tragic end at the hands of Achilles, while heartbreaking, is not a reflection of her weakness, but of the unrelenting nature of fate. The moment of her death is often portrayed as serene, with her final expressions of courage and defiance reflecting the core of her character. Her death marks the end of her life, but not the end of her story. In fact, it is through her sacrifice that her legacy as a warrior queen is solidified. Her myth endures because of her willingness to embody the ideals of courage, sacrifice, and leadership, ideals that transcend the constraints of her time. Moreover, Penthesilea's story has been interpreted through a feminist lens, highlighting her role as a powerful female figure in a world dominated by male heroes. While Achilles is often lauded as the greatest warrior of his time, Penthesilea's encounter with him challenges this notion, suggesting that heroism is not confined to men. The clash between the two warriors, each embodying different ideals of power and purpose, serves as a metaphor for the broader struggles women have faced in male-dominated societies throughout history. In many ways, Penthesilea's image has become an enduring symbol of female empowerment. She is not just a warrior, she is an archetype of women who defy the traditional roles assigned to them. She represents women who fight not only for personal survival or glory, but for something greater: the preservation of a community, the safeguarding of an identity, and the refusal to be defined by the limitations others place upon them. In this light, Penthesilea's image has taken on a more universal significance, becoming an icon for the struggle of women to carve out spaces of power in a world that often seeks to marginalize them. Her symbolism extends beyond mere physical strength. Penthesilea is also a symbol of the psychological and emotional resilience that women often need to navigate in a world that seeks to silence them. She is not a perfect figure, but rather one who is defined by her internal struggles, her doubts, and her profound commitment to her people. Her complexity, her grief over the death of her sister, her internal battle with the weight of leadership, and her determination to carry on her mission despite the overwhelming odds, reflects the multifaceted nature of female strength, one that is as emotional and intellectual as it is physical. Penthesilea's leadership style, rooted in mutual respect and shared struggle, is another powerful aspect of her symbolism. Unlike many male leaders in mythology, who often rely on force and domination, Penthesilea's strength lies in her ability to lead by example. Her warriors follow her, not because they are afraid of her, but because they recognize her as one of their own. This bond, this connection between leader and follower, is a testament to the power of unity, trust, and the shared responsibility of leadership. The Amazonian ideal that Penthesilea represents is one of autonomy and equality. In a society where women were not only warriors but also leaders, rulers, and thinkers, Penthesilea embodies the values of independence and self-determination. The Amazons, under her guidance, rejected the traditional roles assigned to women in the wider Greek world. They fought not for their own glorification, but for the preservation of their culture, their autonomy, and their place in the world. Penthesilea, in this sense, becomes not just a heroic figure, but a symbol of the fight for women's agency in all aspects of life. Through art, literature, and modern interpretations, Penthesilea's legacy has continued to grow and evolve, becoming a beacon of strength, resilience, and female empowerment. Her story speaks not only to the timeless power of the warrior spirit, but also to the universal struggle for recognition, respect, and equality in a world that often seeks to undermine the power of women. Her life and death, her triumphs and sacrifices, continue to resonate with those who believe in the power of the individual to shape their own destiny, no matter the challenges they face. To understand the full significance of Penthesilea and her role in the Trojan War, it is essential to explore the culture from which she emerged, the society of the Amazons. The Amazons were more than just a group of warrior women. They were a reflection of a different way of life, one that valued strength, independence, and a deep sense of duty to their people. Their culture, shaped by the harsh realities of their environment, was both unique and formidable, and it was from this culture that Penthesilea drew her identity as a queen, warrior, and leader. The Amazons, as depicted in Greek mythology, were often portrayed as an isolated matriarchal society. They lived in remote regions, far from the influence of other civilizations, and they maintained a lifestyle that was distinct from the patriarchal societies around them. According to myth, the Amazons were descendants of Ares, the god of war, and their society was built around the ideals of strength, honor, and martial prowess. In this world, women did not just participate in battle. They ruled the land, made decisions, and led armies into war. The Amazons were a people who lived by their own code, rejecting the roles typically assigned to women in the wider world. Penthesilea, as one of the most renowned queens of the Amazons, was both a product of and a symbol for this unique culture. She was not just trained in the arts of war, but raised to lead. From a young age, she was immersed in the values of the Amazonian way of life: to be strong, to be independent, and to protect those under her care. This culture of warrior women, bound by duty to each other and their way of life, shaped Penthesilea's character and made her the figure she would become. The Amazons were not only warriors, but also skilled craftsmen, traders, and diplomats. They valued practical knowledge and self-sufficiency. Each Amazon was trained in a wide range of disciplines, including combat, survival skills, and leadership. It was this combination of physical prowess and intellectual strength that set the Amazons apart from the societies around them. Their training was rigorous and demanding, and those who became warriors did so not out of a thirst for violence, but because they believed in the protection and preservation of their people. One of the defining aspects of Amazonian culture was the sense of unity and sisterhood that bonded its members. The Amazons were not isolated individuals. They were part of a collective, each member responsible for the well-being of the group. This sense of unity was perhaps most clearly reflected in their leadership structure. The queens of the Amazons, including Penthesilea, were not only the political and military leaders of their people, but also the spiritual and symbolic figures that embodied the ideals of Amazonian society. They led by example, not by decree, and their authority was rooted in the respect and trust they earned from their warriors. The bond between the Amazons was forged through shared hardship and a mutual commitment to their way of life. There was no room for weakness in their society, and those who could not meet the demanding standards of their training were not seen as failures, but as individuals who had simply not yet reached their full potential. This collective sense of purpose and responsibility was what allowed the Amazons to thrive, despite the external threats they faced. It was a culture built on resilience, adaptability, and an unwavering belief in the importance of community. Penthesilea, as the Queen of the Amazons, epitomized this ideal. She was not only a skilled warrior, but a strategic leader who understood the importance of unity and cohesion within her people. She did not lead from a position of detachment or authority alone, but from a place of deep connection with those she ruled. Her leadership was characterized by her ability to inspire loyalty, to guide her people through the chaos of war, and to ensure that the Amazonian spirit, the courage, determination, and honor that defined them, remained intact. The Amazonian warriors, under Penthesilea's command, were not just fighting for victory. They were fighting for their way of life, for the values they held dear, and for the survival of their culture. Each battle, each skirmish, was a test of their strength, their unity, and their commitment to one another. In this sense, Penthesilea's role as queen was not just about leading her warriors on the battlefield, but about embodying the very essence of the Amazonian spirit. She was both a leader and a protector, a warrior queen who carried the hopes of her people in every action she took. While much of Amazonian culture was centered around the ideal of strength, it was also rooted in a profound respect for nature and the world around them. The Amazons were often depicted as living in harmony with the natural world, understanding the balance between life and death, growth and decay. Their training, their way of life, and even their values reflected this deep connection to nature. The Amazons saw themselves as stewards of the land, protectors not only of their people, but of the environment that sustained them. This connection to the earth and to the forces of nature was central to their identity. The Amazons were not just warriors, they were warriors with purpose. They fought not for conquest or power, but to protect their way of life, to preserve the delicate balance between their people and the world around them. In this respect, Penthesilea was a queen who embodied both the warrior spirit and the caretaker's heart. Her death, as tragic as it was, served as the ultimate sacrifice, a symbol of her devotion to her people, to her warriors, and to the Amazonian way of life that she had worked so hard to protect. In many ways, Penthesilea's life and death were a reflection of the Amazonian ethos. She was a leader who never sought glory for herself, who never hesitated to put the needs of her people above her own desires. She was a warrior who fought not for personal gain, but for the survival of her culture and the preservation of the values that defined her people. Her story, like that of the Amazons, is one of strength, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bond between those who fight for a cause greater than themselves. The Trojan War, one of the most iconic conflicts in Greek mythology, would forever be remembered for the heroes it produced, the battles it spawned, and the legacies it cemented. Among these legacies was that of Penthesilea, the Amazonian queen whose strength, sacrifice, and tragic end would echo through the annals of myth for centuries to come. Though her death at the hands of Achilles was both a personal loss and a turning point in the war, Penthesilea's legacy was far from defined by her final moments. Rather, it was shaped by the values she represented and the lasting impact of her involvement in the war. Penthesilea's decision to join the Trojan War was not one made lightly. She did not fight for the glory or fame that so many of the great Greek and Trojan heroes sought. Her motivations were more profound. She fought for the survival of her people, the Amazons, and for the protection of their way of life. The Amazons, a warrior society of women who had long lived on the periphery of the wider world, understood the realities of war and survival. For Penthesilea, the Trojan War was a stage upon which she would prove the strength and resilience of her people, even as it demanded the ultimate sacrifice. Her entry into the war was marked by a distinct sense of purpose, one that set her apart from many of the male warriors in the conflict. Where the Greeks, led by figures like Achilles, fought for personal glory and the desire for immortality through heroic deeds, Penthesilea's fight was about something much more tangible: the survival of her society, the defense of her people's dignity, and the protection of the legacy of the Amazons. Her leadership and participation in the war were acts of profound courage, driven not by the promise of fame, but by a deep sense of duty. Though her death came at the hands of Achilles, a hero of great renown, it was not in vain. The myth of Penthesilea did not end with her tragic death. Rather, her sacrifice served as a reminder of the brutal costs of war and the profound strength of those who fight for causes greater than themselves. Her legacy continued to live on in the hearts of the Amazons and in the stories of her actions, which would be passed down through the generations. In the years following the Trojan War, Penthesilea's name was etched into the collective memory of both the Greeks and the Trojans. To the Greeks, she was a formidable adversary, a woman whose courage in battle had earned her a place among the great warriors of the age. To the Trojans, She was a symbol of hope and strength, a leader who had come to their aid when they needed it most. Her presence in the war, though brief, left a lasting mark on the conflict, and her name would forever be associated with the power of the Amazons. The aftermath of her death saw the Amazons mourn their queen, but it also saw them rise to meet the challenges ahead. Though Penthesilea had fallen, the legacy of the Amazons endured. Her death, while tragic, served as a catalyst for the continued survival and strength of her people. The Amazonian warriors, who had fought so fiercely by her side, knew that they must honor her memory by continuing the fight. Her death did not mark the end of their struggle. Rather, it marked a new chapter in their story, one that would continue long after the dust of Troy had settled. Penthesilea's involvement in the Trojan War also underscored the larger narrative of female strength in ancient mythology. In an era where heroes were predominantly male and their victories were often the stuff of legend, Penthesilea's story stands out as a testament to the power of women in mythological history. The Amazons, as a collective, defied the gender norms of their time, showing that women could be warriors, leaders, and symbols of strength. Penthesilea, as their queen, embodied these ideals to the fullest. Her involvement in the war highlighted not only her personal strength, but also the strength of an entire society of women who fought for their place in a world that often sought to suppress them. In many ways, Penthesilea's legacy can be seen as a precursor to the feminist ideals that would emerge centuries later. She represents a woman who defied the traditional roles assigned to her and carved out her own path, not as a passive figure, but as an active, powerful leader. The tragedy of her death, while deeply sorrowful, only serves to emphasize the larger theme of female resilience in the face of adversity. Her story is a reminder that strength is not defined by gender, but by will, determination, and the willingness to fight for what is just and right. Over the centuries, Penthesilea's myth has been revisited and reinterpreted in countless forms. Her story has been told in literature, theatre, and art, each retelling adding a new layer of complexity to her character. She has become a symbol of the warrior spirit, of courage in the face of overwhelming odds, and of the enduring strength of women throughout history. In modern times, Penthesilea has been embraced as an icon of female empowerment. Her myth has resonated with those who seek to honor the strength of women in all areas of life, whether in leadership, combat, or everyday struggles. Penthesilea's legacy, shaped by her sacrifice and her unwavering dedication to her people, continues to inspire those who look to her as a model of what it means to live with courage, dignity, and honor. Her death may have marked the end of her life, but it did not mark the end of her influence. Through the stories passed down through the ages, Penthesilea lives on as a warrior queen, a symbol of the Amazonian spirit, and a lasting legacy of the strength and resilience of women throughout history. Penthesilea's story is one that transcends the boundaries of mere myth. She is more than just a figure from the Trojan War, more than a warrior queen who met her end at the hands of Achilles. Her legacy endures because she represents something much larger than her individual life. She embodies the ideals of feminine strength, resilience, and leadership, qualities that have made her a lasting symbol in both myth and history. In many ways, Penthesilea reflects the ideals of the warrior woman, a figure who rises above the typical roles assigned to women in ancient mythology. Unlike the traditional female figures in Greek myth, who were often passive or relegated to secondary roles, Penthesilea carved out a place for herself at the center of the action. She was a queen who led her people with wisdom, courage, and an unshakable sense of duty. She was not defined by her relationships with men or by her beauty. She was defined by her strength, her intelligence, and her unwavering commitment to her people. Penthesilea's character is especially significant because she challenges the notion that women in mythological and historical narratives can only attain power through relationships with men or as secondary figures. In the patriarchal societies of ancient Greece and beyond, women were often seen as objects of desire or mere companions to male heroes. Penthesilea, however, is not defined by these roles. She is a woman who stands alone, whose power is inherent in her own right. She is a queen in her own right, a leader, a warrior who commands respect, not through beauty or relationships, but through her actions and her leadership. Her portrayal in mythology offers a glimpse into a world where women can wield power in a male-dominated society. In doing so, Penthesilea becomes an important symbol of female autonomy. She was a figure who took her place on the battlefield as both a warrior and a ruler, defying the traditional limits placed on women. She was a leader who earned her position through merit and through the strength of her convictions. In the context of Greek mythology, where most women were not given the same opportunities to lead or fight, Penthesilea's story provides a refreshing and powerful counterpoint. Her strength and leadership qualities were not simply about physical prowess. They were also about the ability to inspire, to lead by example, and to fight for the protection and survival of her people. Her story speaks to the heart of what it means to be a true leader, to be someone who places the well-being of others above oneself and who is willing to make the ultimate sacrifice for the greater good. Penthesilea's life was one of service to her people, not for personal glory or fame, but for the preservation of her people's way of life. In this way, her leadership is both powerful and selfless, an idealized vision of feminine strength that transcends the confines of her myth. The tragic nature of Penthesilea's death, her fall in battle, also adds complexity to her reflection of the feminine ideal. In many ways, her death can be seen as a reminder of the price of leadership, the cost of heroism, and the sacrifices that come with holding power. While male heroes like Achilles are often celebrated for surviving their battles and emerging victorious, Penthesilea's death highlights a different truth: that true heroism is not about surviving the fight, but about facing death with honor and dignity. It is through her death that Penthesilea's myth becomes even more poignant, a reflection of the ways in which women, like men, must confront and ultimately overcome the same struggles, both on and off the battlefield. Her death also points to another powerful aspect of her legacy: the way in which her story continues to be retold and reinterpreted through the lens of contemporary feminist ideals. In modern retellings of Penthesilea's story, her life and death have become symbols of the resilience and strength of women in a world that too often seeks to silence them. Penthesilea, in her strength, sacrifice, and leadership, embodies the ideal of the female hero, one who is unapologetically powerful, who claims her own agency in a world that seeks to limit it. Furthermore, Penthesilea's story challenges the traditional notions of femininity. In many ancient cultures, Femininity was often equated with passivity, nurturing, and subordination to male authority. Penthesilea, on the other hand, redefines femininity as a force of active power, strength, and resilience. Her myth makes it clear that women can be both nurturing and fierce, tender and strong. She does not fit neatly into the traditional binary of male and female strength. Rather, she represents a more nuanced and complex understanding of what it means to be a woman in power. In her tragic encounter with Achilles, Penthesilea also confronts the harsh reality of being a female warrior in a world dominated by male heroes. Her death is a reflection of the inevitable conflict between two different ideals of heroism, one based on personal glory and the pursuit of victory at any cost, and the other grounded in self-sacrifice and service to others. While Achilles is celebrated for his strength and glory, Penthesilea's story emphasizes the quiet dignity and profound courage required to lead not for self-interest, but for the collective good. Her struggle is not only one against the physical forces of her enemies, but against the societal structures that limit the potential of women to rise to positions of power and greatness. Penthesilea's legacy, then, is one that continues to inspire and challenge. Her story is a call to action for those who seek to transcend the limitations imposed by society, to defy the roles assigned to them, and to embrace their true power. Penthesilea is not just a warrior queen from an ancient myth. She is a symbol of the strength, dignity, and complexity of women. A figure who inspires not just admiration, but also reflection on the roles women have played and continue to play in shaping history and myth. Penthesilea's journey, from a young Amazonian warrior to the queen who would lead her people into the heart of the Trojan War, is not only one of external conflict, but of internal transformation. Her story unfolds not as a simple hero's tale of victory, but as a complex and nuanced journey of becoming, of realizing what it means to be a true leader, a true warrior, and a true hero in a world that often overlooked her kind. When we think of heroes in myth, we often envision figures who are larger than life, engaged in epic battles that determine the fate of nations. They are heroes who are celebrated in song and story for their triumphs and their strength. Achilles, Heracles, and Odysseus are all famous for their heroic deeds and their glorious victories. However, Penthesilea's journey was different. Hers was a path marked by a quiet strength that would not be fully understood until long after her death. Unlike the heroes whose stories were written in blood and triumph, Penthesilea's path was filled with moments of grief, doubt, and the weight of responsibility. From the beginning, her life was shaped by loss, starting with the death of her sister Hippolyta, which set her on a path of determination to honor her people and preserve their legacy. That early tragedy left a permanent mark on her, but instead of succumbing to despair, Penthesilea channeled her grief into her leadership. It was this inner strength, born from personal loss and the unshakable duty to her people, that formed the core of her identity as a hero. Penthesilea's heroism was not about seeking glory or the adulation of others. She did not fight for fame, but for survival, for the preservation of the Amazonian way of life, and for the women who had trained with her. Her actions in the Trojan War, although heroic in nature, were motivated by a deeper sense of duty. She did not take up arms to prove her worth as a warrior, but to defend her people from the overwhelming forces that sought to destroy them. The true mark of Penthesilea's heroism lies not in her victories, but in her quiet resolve to lead, even when the burden of leadership became unbearable. She faced battles on multiple fronts, not just against the armies of Troy and Greece, but against her own doubts, fears, and grief. Her willingness to push forward, to never give up, even when the weight of her responsibilities seemed insurmountable, was what truly defined her as a hero. While many might define a hero by their physical strength or their ability to emerge victorious in combat, Penthesilea's heroism transcended these traditional measures. Her story is a testament to the idea that true strength is not just about overpowering others, but about the ability to endure, to fight for what is right, and to make difficult choices for the good of others. Penthesilea's journey was one of sacrifice, where her personal desires were always secondary to the needs of her people. In this way, she was both a warrior and a servant, fighting not for herself, but for her community and their survival. The Amazonian queen's inner journey was also one of self-discovery. Throughout her life, Penthesilea wrestled with the expectations placed upon her. As a warrior queen, she had to balance the fierce power of the Amazonian warriors with the delicate duties of leadership. Her story is one of becoming comfortable with the weight of responsibility and understanding that true leadership is not about exerting control, but about inspiring others to fight for a shared vision. Her courage in battle was not just a result of physical prowess, but of a deeply ingrained sense of purpose. She knew what was at stake: the future of her people, the survival of her culture, and the protection of the Amazonian ideals. She understood that her role as a leader required more than just strength in combat. It required a strength of character, a quiet determination that would hold steady in the face of both victory and loss. Even in her final moments, as she faced Achilles on the battlefield, Penthesilea did not waver. Her death, though tragic, was marked by the same quiet resolve that had defined her life. She faced death, not with fear, but with the dignity of a hero who had done everything she could for her people. In her final breath, she became a symbol of the sacrifices that heroes often make. That true heroism is not measured in the accolades or victories one accumulates, but in the selfless dedication to a cause greater than oneself. The lasting impact of Penthesilea's story is the legacy of the quiet strength she represents. Unlike many heroes whose stories are filled with boisterous triumphs and loud victories, Penthesilea's journey reminds us that heroism is often a quiet, internal struggle. Her heroism was rooted in her ability to carry on, to lead, and to sacrifice, even when the weight of her responsibilities seemed too heavy to bear. Through Penthesilea, we see that heroism comes in many forms. While she may not have received the eternal glory that many of the male heroes of the Trojan War did, her story lives on as a powerful reminder that true greatness is not always visible in the moment. Her legacy, marked by courage, sacrifice, and the relentless pursuit of what is right, will continue to resonate as an example of the quiet, enduring strength that lies within all of us. The story of Penthesilea is not just one of a queen's rise and fall, but a reflection of the inexorable hand of fate, a force that shapes and drives the lives of even the most powerful of heroes. In ancient Greek mythology, fate, or Moira, was an unstoppable force, something that could not be altered or avoided. It was a constant presence in the lives of both gods and mortals. And for Penthesilea, her destiny was tightly interwoven with the complex web of fate that controlled the events of the Trojan War. The ancient Greeks believed that no one could escape their destiny, no matter how great or small their actions might be. Even the mightiest of warriors or the wisest of kings were bound by the threads of fate, and Penthesilea, as a woman who had defied the odds to become a queen and warrior, was no exception. From her birth, she was marked by the gods and destined for greatness. But her story also speaks to the inevitable tragedy that would follow, a tragedy that no strength or leadership could overcome. Penthesilea's fate was set into motion the moment she was born, the daughter of Ares, the god of war. As the child of a god, she was already marked by divine influence, and it was clear from the start that her life would be anything but ordinary. Raised among the fierce women of the Amazonian tribe, she was trained to be a warrior, a leader, and a symbol of power. Her strength, both physical and mental, was unmatched, and she quickly rose to prominence as the queen of the Amazons. But even with all of her power, Penthesilea could not escape the forces of fate that would eventually bring her to her tragic end. One of the most striking aspects of Penthesilea's fate is the way in which it mirrors the cyclical nature of war and loss. The Amazonian people were no strangers to battle and sacrifice. They had lived their lives in constant conflict, fighting to protect their land and their way of life. And while Penthesilea's leadership and strength were celebrated, her involvement in the Trojan War, a conflict that had already consumed so many lives, seemed to seal her fate. In a war defined by the clash of gods and heroes, there could be no place for the immortal and the mortal to coexist without inevitable tragedy. Her role in the Trojan War, though pivotal, was ultimately a manifestation of the tragic inevitability that pervades so many myths. Her arrival in Troy was not one of choice, but of destiny. She had heard the call to arms, the cry for help from the Trojans, and saw it as her duty to lead the Amazons into battle. It was a decision that she made not out of self-interest, but out of her sense of responsibility as their queen. But her participation in the war, in the end, was not something that she could control. It was not a decision made by her will alone, but was intertwined with the fate woven by the gods and the unavoidable course of the war itself. Penthesilea's fate was sealed the moment she faced Achilles in battle. Though she was a warrior of great skill and strength, her death was part of a larger plan, a fate dictated by the eternal struggle between the forces of war and peace, between life and death. The clash between her and Achilles, two of the greatest warriors of the age, was always destined to end in tragedy. Achilles, though a hero in his own right, had been driven by a desire for glory and a need to fulfill his destiny as the greatest warrior of his time. Penthesilea, on the other hand, fought not for glory, but for the survival of her people, the preservation of her culture, and the defense of the Amazonian way of life. Their battle, then, becomes a metaphor for the unstoppable forces of fate. It was not a battle between two individuals alone, but a confrontation between the values they represented, a confrontation that would ultimately result in Penthesilea's death, not because she was weaker, but because the gods had decreed it so. The tragic end of the Amazonian queen, slain by Achilles, was the culmination of the intricate patterns of fate that had shaped her life and death. No amount of valor, no skill in combat could change the outcome once fate had determined it. In a larger sense, Penthesilea's tragic death also reflects the nature of war itself, the brutal, uncontrollable force that sweeps up even the noblest of warriors in its wake. War, in Greek mythology, is often portrayed as a force of destruction and inevitability, one that leaves no room for the individual's desires or struggles. Despite her strength and leadership, Penthesilea could not avoid the cruel march of time, the relentless pull of the conflict that demanded her sacrifice. Her death at the hands of Achilles serves as a powerful reminder of the unpredictable and often unjust nature of fate. While Achilles is hailed as a hero, his slaying of Penthesilea is a moment filled with regret and sorrow. His victory in battle does not bring him glory, but instead leaves him with a deep sense of loss. He too becomes a victim of fate, for he has slain a worthy opponent, and in doing so condemned himself to a lifetime of remorse. In many ways, Penthesilea's story embodies the tragic nature of the hero's journey itself. It is a journey marked by both personal triumph and loss, by a constant struggle against the forces of fate that seek to dictate the outcomes of one's life. And while Penthesilea's story ends in death, her legacy as a warrior queen, a symbol of strength and sacrifice, endures. She is a hero, not because she escaped fate, but because she faced it with courage and dignity. The role of fate in Penthesilea's story serves as a reminder that no matter how powerful, how strong, or how determined one might be, the forces that govern life and death are beyond our control. It is this recognition of fate's power and Penthesilea's acceptance of it that elevates her as a tragic yet heroic figure. In the end, her story is not just one of strength, but of the human condition itself, the struggle to fight for what we believe in, even when the outcome is inevitable, and to face death with the same dignity that we live our lives. The death of Penthesilea, though tragic, marked not just the end of a great warrior's life, but the beginning of her legend. Her sacrifice on the battlefield, though final, did not go unnoticed. In the world of ancient Greece, where heroes were immortalized through tales and songs, Penthesilea's passing would echo through the generations as a symbol of the ultimate price of heroism. Her life and death transcended her mortal existence, becoming part of the eternal narrative of the Trojan War and the broader tapestry of myth. The mourning of Penthesilea was as profound as her life had been. Her warriors, the Amazonian women who had fought so fiercely by her side, felt the loss deeply. The Amazons had always been a people defined by their strength, but Penthesilea's death revealed the vulnerability that lay beneath their hardened exterior. It was not just the loss of a queen that caused them grief. It was the loss of their purpose, their guiding force, the woman who had led them through countless trials and had symbolized their ideals of courage, sacrifice, and unity. After the battle, Penthesilea's body was brought back to the Amazonian camp, where her warriors prepared for the solemn rituals of her burial. In Amazonian culture, death was not an end, but a transition, a return to the earth from which warriors had once sprung. The Amazonian people believed in honoring their dead with reverence and respect, and the rituals surrounding a warrior's burial were sacred. The burial of a queen was an even more significant affair. As the leader of the Amazons, Penthesilea's body would be treated with the utmost reverence. The burial rites involved the offerings of weapons, armor, and symbols of the Amazonian people's strength, gifts that would accompany her on her journey to the afterlife. The funeral pyre was built, and the smoke that rose from it was seen as a signal to the gods, a message that Penthesilea's soul would be honored and her memory preserved. Her body was laid upon the pyre, surrounded by her most trusted warriors. They stood in solemn silence, paying their respects to the woman who had led them, who had fought alongside them, and who had given her life for the preservation of their people. The flames consumed her body, but the ashes of Penthesilea were not the end of her legacy. Her spirit, it was said, would live on in the hearts of her people and in the stories told about her for generations to come. The Greeks, who had witnessed her death, were not untouched by the loss of such a great warrior. Achilles, who had delivered the fatal blow, found himself in deep reflection. Though he had killed her, it was not with the joy of victory that he watched the Amazonian queen's body burn. In his heart, he knew that the battle between them was not one of true animosity, but of fate. He had respected her as a warrior, and her death weighed heavily on him. It was said that Achilles, once triumphant in his victory, now mourned the loss of a worthy opponent. He, too, understood that the true cost of war was not the number of bodies that fell, but the lives lost, the futures undone, and the bonds severed. For the Amazons, Penthesilea's death was a call to arms. Though they had lost their queen, their warrior spirit had not been extinguished. The memory of Penthesilea's courage, her resolve, and her commitment to her people would continue to inspire the Amazons to fight, to lead, and to protect their way of life. She was gone, but her legacy remained, a living, breathing force that would carry the Amazons forward. In the years that followed, the myth of Penthesilea continued to grow. Poets, artists, and storytellers would add their own layers to her story, emphasizing her role as a warrior queen who had faced the gods and heroes of her time and had left her mark upon the world. Her image as a tragic hero, one whose life was marked by both glory and sorrow, would resonate with audiences for centuries. The contrast between her strength and her vulnerability, her courage and her inevitable fate, made her one of the most compelling and enduring figures in myth. Her burial, marked by the sacred rites of the Amazons, became a symbol not just of her death, but of the values she represented. It was a reminder that even the greatest of warriors must eventually fall, but that their sacrifice is never in vain. For Penthesilea, her death was not the end of her story. It was the beginning of her transformation into legend. The funeral rites ensured that her memory would live on, not just in the stories of the Amazons, but in the hearts of all those who believed in the power of courage, leadership, and sacrifice. The Amazonian warriors continued to honor Penthesilea's memory through their deeds, and as long as there were warriors who remembered her, her legacy would endure. Penthesilea had been more than just a queen. She had been a force of nature, a woman whose actions transcended the confines of time and culture. And while her body may have returned to the earth, her spirit would forever remain a part of the warrior ethos, inspiring generations of women and men alike to fight for what is right, to lead with courage, and to sacrifice for the greater good. Penthesilea's story, though set in the world of ancient myth, continues to echo in modern culture. Her tragic end at the hands of Achilles, while a pivotal moment in the Trojan War, has transformed into a symbol of heroism, sacrifice, and the complexities of gender, power, and identity. Over the centuries, Penthesilea has become more than just a figure of myth. She is a cultural icon, one whose story speaks to the timeless struggles for agency, leadership, and equality. In modern literature and art, Penthesilea's legacy has been reimagined in many forms, often reflecting contemporary concerns about gender, power dynamics, and the role of women in society. The initial Greek myths painted her as a fierce warrior queen, leading the Amazons into battle. But modern reinterpretations have expanded on her character, giving her depth and complexity that were only hinted at in ancient texts. Writers, filmmakers, and artists have used her as a lens through which to explore the intersection of femininity and strength, challenging traditional notions of what it means to be a hero. In feminist readings, Penthesilea represents a form of empowerment that was, for a long time, absent from the narrative of ancient mythology. Her strength is not defined by her relationships with men, nor is it dependent on male validation. Instead, her strength is intrinsic. It comes from within, from her ability to lead and inspire her people, and from the fierce love she has for her warriors and her people. Penthesilea is a model of independence, showing that a woman's power does not need to be legitimized by men. She embodies the idea that women can be both leaders and warriors, capable of immense strength and unyielding courage, without needing to adhere to traditional gender roles or expectations. Her story has also been revisited in contemporary theatre, where playwrights have reimagined Penthesilea's life as one of both greatness and tragedy. The Amazonian queen has become a figure who challenges the notion of heroism itself. In some reinterpretations, Penthesilea is portrayed as a tragic figure whose unwavering dedication to her people leads to her undoing. Her story becomes a meditation on the cost of leadership and the sacrifices that must be made in the pursuit of something greater than oneself. Her death, at the hands of Achilles, becomes not just an individual loss, but a comment on the nature of war itself, a war that consumes everyone, regardless of their courage or strength. In modern visual arts, Penthesilea is often depicted as a symbol of defiance and strength. Artists continue to explore her image, emphasizing the contrast between her beauty and her power. These portrayals focus not just on her role as a warrior, but on her identity as a queen who commands respect, a leader who does not back down in the face of overwhelming odds. Penthesilea, in these modern interpretations, is not just a casualty of war, but a living, breathing testament to the power of women in history and mythology. Her face, often painted with a mixture of beauty and solemnity, captures the duality of her existence. A woman who was both a queen and a warrior, both tender and fierce, both human and legendary. Penthesilea has also made her way into more modern media, particularly in the realms of fantasy and historical fiction. The resurgence of interest in mythological figures, especially in books, television shows, and movies that focus on strong female characters, has brought Penthesilea back into the spotlight. In these modern retellings, she often serves as a symbol of women's strength in a world that is still, in many ways, dominated by patriarchal forces. Her involvement in the Trojan War has been re-examined as a way of placing her at the heart of one of the most significant conflicts in myth, challenging the gendered dynamics of ancient warfare and offering a lens through which to question contemporary gender roles. In the world of gaming, Penthesilea has become a beloved character, representing the powerful and fierce female warrior archetype. As modern video games increasingly include complex, multidimensional female characters, Penthesilea fits perfectly into this narrative. She is a character who is both powerful and relatable, embodying the ideal of strength tempered with the wisdom of leadership. Her legacy lives on in these depictions, where she is often portrayed not just as a formidable fighter, but as a tactician, a queen who balances the fierce demands of war with the care and leadership of her people. Her influence extends beyond the realm of fiction and fantasy, touching upon the real-world struggles for gender equality and women's rights. Penthesilea, as a figure of both leadership and war, offers a powerful counterpoint to the traditional ideas of women's roles in society. In a world where women are still fighting for equal representation in many fields, Penthesilea's story reminds us that strength, leadership, and bravery are not the sole domain of men. She is a symbol for all those who seek to defy the constraints placed upon them and to step into positions of power without apology. Even in historical contexts, the legacy of Penthesilea has continued to inspire those who fight for justice and equality. She represents the idea that women can shape their own destinies, that they can lead, protect, and fight for their people, not for the approval of men, but because it is what is right. Penthesilea's death at the hands of Achilles is a tragic reminder that, even in the face of overwhelming odds, the price of heroism can be great. But it is also a reminder that her sacrifice was not in vain. Her legacy lives on in the stories told about her, the values she represented, and the strength she embodied. In a world that continues to grapple with questions of gender, power, and leadership, Penthesilea's myth stands as a beacon of hope and inspiration. Her life, though cut short, was lived with purpose, strength, and dignity. Her story, as a warrior, a queen, and a hero, is one that will continue to inspire generations to come. Penthesilea's myth is not just a story of heroism and sacrifice. It is a story of how one individual's life can transcend time, geography, and culture, continuing to inspire and resonate long after their death. As we reflect on the lasting influence of Penthesilea, we see how her legacy has endured as a symbol of courage, leadership, and the unyielding strength of women throughout history. Her life and death at Troy have become part of the collective mythos, not just in ancient Greece, but in cultures all over the world. Though the ancient Greeks had their own distinct traditions and beliefs, Penthesilea's story speaks to universal themes: the struggles of leadership, the complexities of gender, the price of heroism, and the enduring fight for equality. Her death at the hands of Achilles was not the end of her story, but rather the beginning of a legacy that would be passed down through generations. In mythological terms, Penthesilea's death is often seen as the tragic culmination of her life. However, her legacy has evolved over time, taking on new meanings and layers of interpretation. Her story is no longer just about a warrior who died in battle. It is about a queen who embodied the virtues of leadership and sacrifice, a woman who stood against the forces of fate with unwavering resolve. It is also a story about the complexities of war and its consequences, a narrative that reminds us that victory in battle does not always bring glory. Sometimes it brings regret, sorrow, and reflection. The tragedy of Penthesilea's death, as described in various ancient texts, was not just a loss for the Amazons, it was a loss for the world. Her death marked the end of an era for the Amazons, who had once been a powerful and respected force in the ancient world. But it also marked the beginning of her immortality, as her name would continue to be sung in songs and remembered in stories for millennia to come. Her influence is evident in many aspects of modern culture, especially in the ways that women have been depicted in myth, literature, and art. Penthesilea's story has been embraced as a symbol of female empowerment, showing that women, even in a world dominated by men, can rise to positions of power, leadership, and strength. She is no longer just a character in a myth. She has become a model of what it means to be a woman of power and purpose, someone who leads with dignity, sacrifices for her people, and ultimately defines her own legacy. In literature, Penthesilea's myth has inspired numerous retellings and adaptations. Writers, particularly those focused on feminist narratives, have found in her story a powerful reflection of the struggles women face in both historical and contemporary contexts. By revisiting Penthesilea, these authors explore themes of autonomy, agency, and resilience, giving her a voice in worlds where women's stories have often been overlooked or minimized. In this way, Penthesilea's myth continues to evolve, adapting to the needs of each generation while remaining rooted in the core values that made her such a compelling figure. In art, Penthesilea has been portrayed in a variety of ways, often as a powerful and noble figure. From classical sculptures and paintings to modern interpretations in graphic novels and digital media, Penthesilea has become an icon of strength and grace. Artists have captured her both in moments of triumph and in the quieter, more reflective moments of her life. As a queen contemplating the weight of leadership, or as a warrior charging into battle. These visual depictions of Penthesilea not only honor her legacy, but also continue to shape how we perceive female power in art and culture. In the realm of modern cinema and television, Penthesilea has been reimagined as a fierce and complex character, often taking center stage in stories that explore themes of gender equality, the role of women in leadership, and the cost of heroism. Her story has been woven into narratives that challenge traditional gender roles and offer new perspectives on what it means to be a hero. Through these modern adaptations, Penthesilea's legacy as a warrior queen has taken on new significance, offering inspiration to new generations who are seeking role models of strength, independence, and courage. Penthesilea's influence extends beyond just storytelling and the arts. Her story is also a reflection of the broader struggle for gender equality. In many ways, Penthesilea's journey mirrors the struggles that women have faced throughout history. The fight for agency, for recognition, for the right to stand as equals to men in fields traditionally reserved for them. She has come to represent the idea that women are just as capable as men of leading, of fighting, and of sacrificing for a cause greater than themselves. Her story is a call to action for those who still fight for these rights today, a reminder that the fight for equality is ongoing, and that women can, and should, take their place in the world as powerful, dynamic figures. As we look back on Penthesilea's legacy, it is clear that her story is one that resonates not only with the people of her time, but with the world today. Her heroism, her leadership, and her unwavering commitment to her people make her a figure worth remembering, not just in ancient myth, but in the present day. The values she embodied, strength, sacrifice, resilience, and the courage to face the inevitable, are as relevant now as they were in the time of the Trojan War. Her story will continue to inspire those who seek to lead with integrity, to fight for what is right, and to honor the sacrifices made by those who came before them. In the end, Penthesilea's death did not erase her legacy. It only solidified it. Through her sacrifice, she became immortal, her story woven into the fabric of myth and history. As long as her name is remembered, as long as her story is told, Penthesilea's legacy will live on, a shining example of the power of women, the cost of heroism, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. As we come to the end of Penthesilea's journey, it is clear that her story is one that transcends time. Her life, though marked by battles, sacrifice, and ultimate tragedy, remains a beacon of strength, leadership, and unwavering resolve. The Amazonian queen's legacy is not one defined solely by her tragic death at the hands of Achilles, but by the way in which she embodied the ideals of courage, honor, and the unyielding spirit of a warrior. Penthesilea's story is a reminder of the power of resilience, the ability to rise above personal loss, to lead in the face of adversity, and to fight for something greater than oneself. Her role in the Trojan War, while short, had a profound impact on both the Greek and Trojan forces. She proved that the Amazons, though often viewed as outsiders, were a force to be reckoned with. Her leadership, intelligence, and combat skills were unparalleled, and her influence would resonate far beyond the battlefield. Even in the moments leading up to her death, Penthesilea's strength remained unshaken. She fought not for glory, but for the survival of her people. Her death, while a tragic loss for the Amazons, was also a powerful testament to the ideals she held dear. Her sacrifice served as a symbol of the lengths one is willing to go to in order to protect those they love and the way of life they hold dear. In the years that followed her death, Penthesilea's name would continue to live on in myth, art, and literature. Her image as a fierce warrior queen, a woman who defied the expectations of her time and fought to protect her people, would inspire countless generations. She would become not just a figure of the past, but a timeless symbol of the strength of women and the enduring power of those who fight for justice and equality. For the Amazons, Penthesilea was more than just a queen. She was a living embodiment of the spirit of their people. Her leadership, courage, and devotion to the Amazonian way of life were unmatched. Her memory would continue to inspire future generations of Amazonian warriors who would carry her legacy into the future, ensuring that the ideals she fought for would never be forgotten. For Achilles, Penthesilea's death was a turning point. Though he had slain her, he could not escape the weight of his actions. The memory of her strength and sacrifice would haunt him, and he would come to realize that the true cost of war was not in the number of enemies defeated, but in the lives lost. Lives that could have been allies, leaders, and heroes in their own right. Achilles, too, would be forever marked by his encounter with Penthesilea, her death serving as a reminder of the fragile nature of fate and the consequences of violence. Penthesilea's story is not just about battle or glory, but about the strength of character, the power of resilience, and the enduring fight for what is right. Her legacy continues to inspire those who seek to lead with integrity, to fight for justice, and to honor the sacrifices made by those who came before them. Her story challenges us to look beyond the surface, to understand that true strength is not measured by physical prowess alone, but by the courage to stand up for one's values, even when faced with overwhelming odds. As we reflect on the life and legacy of Penthesilea, we are reminded that the greatest heroes are not always those who emerge victorious, but those who fight with honor, courage, and a deep sense of duty. Penthesilea may have fallen on the battlefield, but her spirit lives on in the hearts of those who continue to tell her story. A story of a queen, a warrior, and a woman whose strength will never be forgotten. As we reach the end of Penthesilea's journey, we are reminded that her legacy, though shaped by the tragic events of the Trojan War, extends far beyond her death. Her strength, leadership, and courage left an indelible mark, not only on the Amazons, but on the very fabric of myth itself. Penthesilea's story, marked by both glory and sacrifice, teaches us that true heroism is not always found in victory, but in the courage to face the inevitable with dignity and resolve. Her death at the hands of Achilles, though sorrowful, does not define her story. Rather, it is the way she lived, the choices she made, the battles she fought, and the values she upheld that continues to resonate through the ages. As both a queen and a warrior, Penthesilea embodied the power of leadership, the necessity of sacrifice, and the unyielding strength of women who refuse to be defined by others' expectations. Her legacy lives on in the retellings of her story, in the artwork that depicts her as both fierce and noble, and in the voices of those who continue to remember her as a symbol of the eternal fight for what is just and right. Penthesilea's myth is a reminder that heroes come in many forms, and that the strength of the human spirit, especially in the face of adversity, is something that never fades. Through Penthesilea, we see that true heroism lies not just in the victories we win, but in the sacrifices we make, the ideals we fight for, and the legacies we leave behind. As long as her name is remembered, her spirit will endure, inspiring future generations to rise, lead, and fight. Not for glory, but for what is right. Thank you for following Penthesilea's story. May her courage and strength continue to guide us long after the battle has ended.